Good evening. Tonight we have tea time on Caetsu Chaiji channel, as we do every other week or so. What that means is that we're going to be talking about a little bit of everything and nothing in Final Fantasy XIV. If this was ever a stream where you would like to ask like a random question about the game, this would be the perfect place to do that. We will also be looking at some clips that this community that we have here has posted to me. And if you would like to post a clip of your own for one of these streams, remember that there's a Discord community server where you will find the clip reviews room where you can post them. There's also a pinned comment there that explains how that works. Now, I've set up this little spot. I don't think we need this many chairs, but now we have them. So that we don't just sit on the grass or stand on the grass. Don't know if I'll change it later, but I just got this idea real quick. Right. Hey Murphog, hey Gazel, hey Ardell, hey Tristan, hey Kitsuneko, and hey Vyak. I hope you're all doing very well. In regards to what clips we have today, hey Orion, hope you're doing well. In Taro Ta'adun. Have you been playing StarCraft? Right, so we have we still have a clip from Jet in case they come back. We also have a clip from Sergeant Blaine of doing T8, which is of course it is, I believe it's this one. Second Call of Bahamut turn 3. It gets a little weird with the numeration because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm pretty sure it's this one. With 3 players, apparently. Which is interesting, at the very least. There isn't, like, that much to comment on that or review, but it's interesting to see these things. Then both Kitsu and Cole has also posted some silly clips of each their own. And Gleaming Gamora has posted a P12 run, where they want some general advice. And Gazel has posted a Puppet's Bunker run, where they also want, like, there are some specific things, but there's also some general advice. It's a pretty long clip on account of being, you know, Puppet's Bunker, but I have a reasonably good idea of where there is, like, the, like, difficult points in Puppet's Bunker. I've done it quite a lot. So I have a pretty good idea on that. There's also some interesting mechanics in Puppet's Bunker that are interesting to like review in general. So I think we have a pretty good lineup. With that said, I would like to start by reminding you that tomorrow, the Starlight celebration begins. Which of course means that there will be some event quests, or maybe just event quest, singular. Which means that we will get a new, like, Christmassy outfit. That's pretty much it. I don't think there's going to be like. I think it's just an outfit. I think there might also be like a furniture item. Sometimes there's going to be like a vendor that sells some other stuff, but it isn't really highlighted in this case. Hey Rust, hope you're doing well. Yeah. What can I say? Do any of you have any questions before I start looking at clips or something? Or start going on my own little tirade? There's actually something that I had been considering for like for streaming stuff is given that we're working through every now and then doing a stream of pushing through the content that is, whether content is soloable in Final Fantasy XIV. I wonder if it would be interesting to see how hard it is, or how easy it is, again, to do it with a character dedicated to it. I know that it has been done before, but maybe I can do it differently. Maybe you'll want to see how I would go about it. But that is something that I have been considering. For example, I have been, I went into Sastasha the other day with White Mage and discovered it was way easier to do it with a White Mage compared to with Scholar when I did it the first time. And if you were to go through the game from the very beginning, you wouldn't even have Scholar in Sastasha, because the requirement to unlock Scholar is that you beat Ifrit normal. Yeah. Which, of course, how's that a requirement is, of course, given by the simple fact that you need to complete self-management, as you probably know, and that quest is situated after Ifrit normal. Orion says, more of a general topic than an actual question, I suppose. Do you think the list of easiest job to play for each category will shift around a lot in Dawntrail? I think that depends a lot on how the difficulty is on the new jobs and whether they add a lot to the old jobs. For example, there's a reasonably good chance that the tanks are going to stay in the current ranking they have right now, where people are like Warrior and Paladin are kind of easy, and then Dark Knight and Gunbreaker are kind of hard, typically. Healers are probably going to stay in their current situation, where White Mage and Sage are considered the easy ones, and Scholar and Astrologian are considered the hard ones. Ranged physical might likely stay as they are. I think the one thing that I could imagine that would upset that balance quite heavily is, let's say, like, one of the things that makes Bard really hard is that you need a target to use your songs, which means that this can completely mess with your song order. By not having a target. If they made some sort of, like, I don't know, like quality of life thing where they made it so that was no longer a requirement, that would already, like, reduce the difficulty of Bard quite a lot. I could also imagine if they remove, hypothetically, not saying they will, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did. I do believe I predicted this like at least half a year ago, if not closer to a year ago, that if Bard loses their dots, I said it first, and if they lose their dots, then they would both lose, you know, Caustic Bite, Storm Bite, and then Iron Jaws would have no purpose, so either they would remove that as well, or maybe they would rework the 3 actions to do something completely different. And if they do that, I think that would actually make Bard easier. They could also, for example, make it so that if you have a straight shot ready, burst shot just turns into a refulgent arrow. And that would also make it easier. If they made it so that you could have multiple stacks of straight shot ready, then the weirdness in the opener, I talk about this in my high level. I think I only talk about it in the high level Bard opener, but I might mention it in the low level one. Because of Barrage giving straight shot ready, the moment where you're supposed to use Barrage is actually a time where the Bard opener splits. Like, it actually splits between 2 different openers depending on whether you had a proc or not leading up to it. Which, I mean, it's a relatively small DPS loss, right? Like 60 potency is what you're losing, something like that. But playing it really well or perfectly still matters, and making it so you can have multiple straight shot ready stacks would mean that you won't get forced to, like, oh, you have to make sure to use Refulgent Arrow exactly on the dot, which would make the job easier. So what I'm trying to say is, right now I would say that the difficulty ranking among the ranged physical is like Dancer's really easy, and then Machinist is like, it has a range of difficulty depending on whether you're like lining up with raid buffs or not. If you're not, it's really easy. If you are, then it's relatively difficult. If you're trying to play perfectly, then Bard becomes harder because it has a lot of randomness in it and a lot of opportunities to fail. But what I'm getting at here is that ranged physical is probably not going to have a lot of changes unless Bard gets some surprise changes. I do believe we have heard that a lot of jobs are getting significant changes in Dawntrail. Like, they've said this separately from, oh yeah, Dragoon and Astrologian are getting a rework. Also, hey Gleaming Gamora, hey HK, hey Imian, hey Amokius, and hey Tybear. Hope you're all doing well. We're starting a diner. No. I just, sometimes people have mentioned on these streams that when we're just hanging out here, we're just like sitting on the grass or just standing at the fence or something. So I added some tables and some chairs. So now we can sit down. But I think it would shock me if there was like a significant upset in the difficulty rankings between the ranged physical, but I would say that if something were to change, it's ultimately down to what they do with Bard and not very much down to what they do with Dance and Machinist, because Dance and Machinist would have to like become significantly more complicated to challenge Bard at the way that it is complicated, because the way Bard is complicated is that it has quite a lot of things to keep track of with its songs, the procs from its songs, and its dots, and then just a lot of cooldowns and procs like the straight shot one. And they would have to remove some of that to like pull Bard down so that it can compete with Machinist, for example. Other than that, I don't think anything there. For melee DPS, I think a really interesting thing here is that depending on what skill level you play to, there's a reasonable chance that you will view either Reaper, Samurai, or Ninja as the easiest melee DPS. The reason for that is Samurai doesn't have a raid buff or a temporary damage buff, so you just face plant on your cooldown and it's all good. If you're playing to raid buffs, then you suddenly care a lot more about using them at the right time. Reaper just has a really slow rotation that gives you time to think and plan in between your moves and such. But its burst can get complicated, and there can be planning in it when you're trying to optimize. Again, how you can see where if you're not trying to play perfectly, then Reaper can be viewed as extremely easy. And then again, it has a lot of space to optimize. Now you might be thinking, how can Ninja be the easiest melee job in this comparison? And the reason for that is that the way Ninja works is that it just goes like John Madden for 15 to 20 seconds and then nothing for 40 seconds, pretty much. Actually the Ninja just goes and then just kind of sit there. And it does this in a much higher degree than all other jobs do. The Ninja just throws out all of its cooldowns and then have nothing for 40 seconds. And if you're used to burst windows, then Ninja might be incredibly easy because the hard part is, using your cooldowns in a burst, which is what it's made to do. But then again, there's still a significant difficulty in just getting in a pretty high skill floor. Now, we are getting a new melee DPS in the Viper, and it also happens to be competing with Ninja because they use the same gear. So the question there is, will Viper be considered easier than Ninja? Will it be considered easier than Samurai, and will it be considered easier than Reaper? And while we are here, the additional question is, what's going to happen with Dragoon? Is it going to be easier than, Reaper, Samurai, Ninja? And the reason why I'm saying, why I'm listing so many jobs in this comparison is because I know players, a significant amount of players, that will agree with me if I said Reaper is the easiest melee DPS. I also know a significant amount of players that believe Samurai is the easiest melee DPS. And I also know a quantity of players that say that Ninja is the easiest melee DPS because of this burst argument. So, like, the reason why Ninja is considered easy is, of course, if you assume that the skill floor that we're comparing with understands burst windows and maybe understands how to use your cooldowns in a planned way. If you do that, then Ninja is very easy. But that is like a step higher up than the absolute minimum. Rust says, is Viper melee or ranged? It is melee. It uses dual swords and can combine it into a glaive, like a double-bladed glaive. I have a video where I talk a little bit about it, and there's of course also the reveal trailer. There is the possibility that that Viper will play similarly to Reaper. It is very, very easy to like fit what we've seen already of Viper into, the clip that you see in the trailer, if you remember it, I've been told that the first attack that the Viper uses actually shows the applied debuff effect on the enemy. There might also be like a small sound of it. You know how when you apply debuff on something, there's like this sound and a little spell effect. Apparently some people see that, which means that the first action you use it's basically Shadow of Death, right? It could be exactly the same as Shadow of Death, hypothetically. And then you do a 1-2-3 combo. 1-2-3 combo. Then you switch into glaive mode, which we only see you switch to the mode and then do one attack. Hypothetically, the switch itself could be an ability. And then the follow-up attack with the glaive is a weapon skill, for example. And that could then maybe switch you back. We don't actually see you use an action after using that attack, but we do see you go back to the idle position. So it's not entirely clear. It could also be that the thing that we used was close in comparison to Gluttony, so you get a set amount of actions or something. And then you have, a blue aura mode. So, I'm not saying Viper's going to be Reaper again. That would be really, really boring. I'm just saying that they can do that. With what we know so little about the job that if we assume that that all we get is what we saw, then we can pretty much make it Reaper. What about a blade mode? What is a glaive? Is it a type of blade? It is actually a type of blade with 2 blades on it. We could get that, and if we get that, then there is also a reasonable possibility that Viper is going to be easier than Reaper. It is also possible it'll be harder, but we don't know. Just see here. Type says, I would love a consistent 1-2-3 for Bard, with the OGCDs being the alternating parts as the songs change. I feel like giving every single physical job a 1-2-3 combo is a little bit boring maybe, but I can see why Bard just having 1-1-1-1-1-1-1 2, if you get, Refulgent Arrow, is also a little bit boring. And yeah, exactly as Matthew says, Sage exists, they're not above duplicating jobs. And if you're saying, what do you mean by that? I've talked about this before, but so at level 45, Sage gets Lustrate. And then at level 50, you get this button called Sacred Soil, which puts out a dome that reduces all damage by 10%. And also at level 78, it gets a healing component added to it. And, at level 58, Sage gets this tool that allows it to turn its shields into healing, with emergency tactics. And, ooh, is there another one? At level 76, it gets a cooldown that heals in an area around it. Incidentally, the Sage version also applies damage reduction and a shield. And has a longer cooldown. You get where I'm going with this. You could also do this same joke with Paladin and Gunbreaker. Although it's not as clear, it's like... It's more in relation to their burst. Like, this Confiteor Blade combo is basically... You take the Gnashing Fang combo and just add double down at the front. That's basically it. HK says easier than Reaper would mean Viper has 3 buttons and plays itself alone. Well then. Murfolk said, Dancer change. You now have to time all the skill presses at the tempo of the current duty's BGM. Failure will result in a 50% DPS loss. I sure hope that if you do it right, it gives you a damage boost then, because sometimes the BPM doesn't work. Hey 11, hope you're doing well. The Gazel says they're a bit too cautious about Sage. Hope they would get more creative and make Scholar and Sage more interesting in different ways. I agree. I also, like, I'm just saying, I think I said this before. I'm not saying Viper could be made as Reaper, because I want that. I don't want that. I actually absolutely don't want that. My main complaint with the 2-minute burst has not been, oh, it's boring, it's annoying. The reason why I've been complaining about the 2-minute burst is because it makes jobs feel too similar, and it's really difficult to make good jobs that don't fit in the 2-minute burst, which means that all jobs will feel very similar, because they're like making this strict system where most of your damage has to be in a 15-second burst every 2 minutes doesn't like lend itself to very much creativity. That is why I don't like, that is my only really big complaint with the 2-minute burst, is that it makes it difficult to make jobs unique or feel unique. Which is, for example, the reason why Paladin and Gunbreaker feel very similar in a way, and why Warrior and Dark Knight feel very similar in a way. So it's hard. And also, I didn't finish on this with the do you think the ranking of easiest jobs will change? The new mage DPS would have to be insanely simple to be easier to play than Summoner. Or they would have to add something ridiculous to Summoner. Like, Summoner has set the bar so incredibly low that I don't know how you would make a simpler mage than that. Ryan says that rhythm game is a thing in searching character combos in both Tekken 7. Oh, interesting. That is wild. And that there's a rhythm game thing in a fighting game. Like, if it works the way that you where you have to click it to the beat, that must make it really, really difficult. There's also the possibility that those kinds of characters that do that just become gimmick characters that people don't use in tournaments. I don't know. Murfolk says, if Dragoon is easier than Monk, why does Monk feel better to play? The thing is, you can take any section of jobs, like any category of roles, and you might be able to argue that it is easy or hard, depending on your preference. For example, some players find Gunbreaker easy to play. Some players find Gunbreaker easier to play than Warrior, not because Warrior is hard necessarily, but because the strictness of the Gunbreaker rotation they just find easier. There's also some players that say that they find Astrologian the easiest healer to play because the sheer quantity of stuff you have to do keeps their attention. Similarly, for some players, Monk is easier than Dragoon, and for others, Dragoon is easier than Monk. Personally, I find it difficult to rank Dragoon because Dragoon is in a... It's not like... Generally, it's not, to my knowledge, considered like a super hard job. It's like on average, I think it like falls like in middle of the pack in terms of difficulty. And because of that, its real difficulty is highlighted in how the individual experiences it. For example, I find Dragoon can be very difficult because of the quantity of buffs and cooldowns it has to line up. Like, it is very easy for these to drift apart. Lance Charge, Dragon Sight, and Battle Litany. And that's before we even start to talk about Life of the Dragon and things like that. Like, there's so many things that are really willing to like slip apart. Like, it's like Dragoon is like carrying this like huge stack of plates, and all of them have like just been dunked in oil, so they're just slipping around. That's how it feels to me. And that means that unless I'm doing like a fixed fight where I'm just like I can use my cooldowns on cooldown, unless I'm doing that, I'm always scared of everything just falling apart when I'm playing Dragoon, which leads me to prefer if I'm choosing what job I'm playing in a roulette. If I'm playing tank, I'm usually playing warrior, maybe paladin, because they don't have that many opportunities for all of their buttons to fall apart like that. If I'm playing healer, I'm usually playing sage, just because I find it easier. And if I'm playing a DPS, there's a really high chance I'm playing like black mage actually, or maybe summoner, maybe samurai. But many of the jobs that I'm like not really feeling is because I might also play red mage actually, and it has nothing to do with mage privilege or mage preference. It's just because all of the jobs that that I have like sorted out is they have some sort of like opportunity for things to break apart. I might also play Reaper, but there's a very, very small chance that I would choose to play Dragoon or Machinist or even Dancer or Bard or Monk in a roulette, because I just find all of the other DPS easier simply because there's less things that can like break. But let's say you're a player that don't care about everything being relatively perfect and planned out like that. Then all of these worries and concerns that I'm bringing up are completely meaningless. There you go. Or maybe you're really good at the job, so you don't have to worry about it because you're so good that you don't mess it up. Or you just know what to do about it. But yeah, the reason why it's really very much about the mages is because, I mean, Summoner, it's mostly just Searing Light, but it's 3%. It's pretty minor. Red Mage, if you're using Embolden, you're probably also using Manification. And everything else is just use it when you can. Black Mage, it's mostly just ley lines. It is mostly just ley lines. And when it's just one thing, then it's not nearly as problematic. Matthew is a summoner, but permanently in Bahamut with numbers reduced to be balanced. How would you do that? Like, how would you actually do that without the job not actually just becoming the most boring thing in the universe? you would be using Death Flare and Enkindle Bahamut on cooldown and just mashing 1. And then every minute you would use Energy Drain and 2 Festus or something. That would be ridiculous. It would absolutely be ridiculous. You would lose these 2 buttons and these 3 buttons and probably also this button, because when would you do that? That was the point. Fair enough. Hey YouTube, hope you're doing well, and hey Silverment. I did notice I basically said Red Mage as you said no Red Mage. Gazel says, I wonder if anyone feels Black Mage to be easier. Absolutely. There are some players that believe that Black Mage is easy. There are some players that believe Black Mage is the easiest. And it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense. Pretty funny. I'm pretty sure a while ago, like a while back, that I read a comment on a video where someone actually said that they found Black Mage the easiest, and then they also said that Summoner, they just didn't get it. They just could not play it for the life of them. They did not know how to play Summoner. They couldn't do it. Which is wild, right? And I don't think they were kidding. No, folks said, having played both Dragoon and Monk, I can say Dragoon feels a bit more streamlined, given that your rotation turns into a 10-step combo. I do feel the difficulty lied in mobility when I played. Given that your gap closers are part of your damage rotation, all you have is sprint and a clunky backflip. Yeah, so in terms of like gap closing, Monk has the absolutely ingenious invention known as hold on to your hats, if you have one, a gap closer that does not do damage, which gives them this massive advantage of having a gap closer when they need one. But in terms of the looping rotation, Monk has an 18-step looping rotation. It's just it's an emergent looping rotation, whereas Dragoon just has a 10-step looping rotation that is like served as 2 5-step combos. Monk instead has 6 3-step combos, and the only reason it loops is because if you draw out, like, the way that Monk works, for those that don't know, is that you alternate between Boot Shine and Dragon Kick, whereas Dragon Kick is over here. And you alternate between Twin Snakes and True Strike. And then you do Snap Punch twice and Demolish once. Because of this, by just following these rules, if you do the optimal thing in every set of 3 moves, after 6 sets, the 7th one will be the same as the first one. This isn't something that happens very much, but let me put it like this. Paladin got reworked. I know. Shocking new revelation. The Paladin's old rotation was like a completely set in stone, boxed in 1-minute loop. You could make it a little different, especially if you were a slow Paladin, so you had very little skill speed. But that was the idea, that you basically did this loop. I believe they had a 1-minute loop and a 2-minute loop. That was that. Like, those were the options. Then you used a 1-minute loop if you're a fast Paladin, you used a 2-minute loop if you were a slow Paladin. So, as I recall, it's been a while. With the rework, so I was working on a Paladin guide, you know, a new starter guide and a new high-level guide, as the rework went live. Like, I was actually writing the manuscript based on patch notes without even knowing for sure if the things worked the way that they did, and then I had to like go into the game and then adjust things on the fly. And yeah, exactly, atonement dropping and stuff. Now, I was following the Balances Paladin section of the Discord, and it was quite chaotic because at the start, people were trying to like put together a 1-minute loop, put together a 2-minute loop, And as this was happening, this new rogue strategy known as a priority list came around. Like an opener followed by just a priority list. Do this if like priority 1, 2, 3, 4. And you see, if you watch my Paladin guides, that's the way I did it. A fun little like behind the scenes on that was that I actually rewrote my entire guide for high level to match this new priority system when it came about, where my original script was based on a looping rotation. But I changed it because 1, the priority rotation was easier, and 2, because it seemed the priority rotation was at least nearly as good as a looping rotation would be. Now, the reason why this is interesting is because while these conversations were happening, people were putting together 1-minute loops, 2-minute loops. I think they even made 3-minute loops to try and make things fit together. Now, the thing is, the way these looping rotations work is that they just spell out the entire rotation and then find their way back to the start. And sometimes they do this by dropping atonement and things like that. The name for the priority rotation was quite interesting. They didn't, like, some players didn't want it to just be called a priority rotation because that sounds like maybe a bit reductive. So they wanted to give it a specific name, you know, like how Machinist, turns out they have 4 different openers that then lead subsequently to 4 different rotations. And each of them has a unique name. One particular one that sometimes comes up here, around here, is the Delayed Tools opener. Which I believe is the one where you don't use Air Anchor immediately. But when they were naming the priority rotation for Paladin, one of the suggestions for name was the 7-minute looping rotation. And now you might be thinking, wasn't it a priority rotation? Yes, but someone sat down and wrote out, if you just continued the rotation following the priority list from 0 seconds onwards, it just so happens to loop naturally exactly at 7 minutes. So like, that's the 7-minute looping rotation. And people were like, that's a little silly. So someone said, how about we call it the hallowed rotation? Why should it be called the hallowed rotation? Because hallowed ground has a 7-minute cooldown. Huh? And then people said, nah, that's too deep of a cut. Like, every time you refer to the hallowed rotation to someone who doesn't know what it is, their first question is, what's the hallowed rotation? And then you go, well, it's this one. And then maybe they ask, why is it called the hallowed rotation? Then you have to say, look at hallowed ground, it's cooldown. Like, if you're naming something and the name doesn't actually explain what it is, then it isn't a good name. And then it just, I think they just call it the priority rotation, but these days I think they just call it the rotation. Because after a buff to Paladin, specifically a quality of life buff and a potency buff, they made atonement dropping so bad, because the thing is, after the rework, atonement dropping was already like on the brink of being straight up a DPS loss. Like, there were very, very niche situations where it was actually good. But there were like very rare situations where it might be fine. Otherwise, you should just do priority rotation. Then they buffed the things like atonement, and then they made it so that atonement doesn't break your combo, which means that the only benefit to atonement dropping was that you could guarantee that every burst you did had 2 Divine Might Holy Spirits and a Royal Authority in it. Compare that to the average burst, if you like just play priority rotation, where you get Royal Authority or 2, like Royal Authority, 1 Atonement and 1 Holy Spirit, or 2 Atonements and 1 Holy Spirit. The potency difference, for those that don't know, is 50. Between getting it perfect and just priority rotation, whatever. So it was so little that the DPS loss of dropping Atonement was way greater. So that's why, like, looping rotations and stuff for Paladin has sort of, like, gone a little bit by the wayside. Hey Zach, right now we're talking about Paladin. It came in because of looping rotations. We're talking about the fact that Dragoon has a naturally looping rotation with 2 5-step combos, and Monk has an emergent 18-step looping rotation just because after 6 sets of 3, the 7th set happens to be the first set again. Like, it's just, you just see that it's the same thing. It's actually a little bit like math and logic. And Paladin, when people were inventing the priority rotation, tried to argue that it is actually a looping rotation, because if you follow the priority rotation for 7 minutes, then it is technically a looping rotation. 7 minutes. Let's see. Gazel says, which action is Atonement? Atonement is the action that you can use 3 times after having used Royal Authority. Let me just catch up a little bit here. Matthew has a person that finds Black Mage easier than Summoner in the static. That is pretty funny. HK says, trying to understand what would make someone feel confused about Summoner. With Black Mage, aside from the Astral Fire and Umbral Ice thing, all of your actions do exactly what they say they do. That's it. Summoner, many of your actions don't actually explain in detail what they do. Like, there's actually, if you try to just read the tooltips of Summoner, there's a reasonable chance that you will not understand how the job works. Even if you read every single tooltip from start to finish. The easiest way to learn Summoner is to read the tooltips like a little bit, and then just go to a striking dummy and click buttons. Because the tooltips don't exactly explain how they work. Like, not exactly. So I think that might be it. It can also just be that it's weird. Merfolk said, if you're out of Thunderclap, you have 6-sided star. That is true. And that is also the optimal thing to do if you're stepping away anyway. Evan says, what if we just run to the enemy? The first monk, probably. That's how they... Well, actually, here's an interesting thing. And if you came to Final Fantasy XIV, I believe in Endwalker, then you will not have known this. Monk used to have an action called Shoulder Tackle, which was, I think it was a 30-second cooldown that was a gap closer. Now, they learned this action at level 35, so you can imagine where that went. And a really interesting thing with that is these things like Riddle of Fire, Riddle of Wind, and Riddle of Earth, and things like that. That wasn't the full story. In addition to having these 3 riddles, you also had elemental shoulder tackles. I believe that was removed in Shadowbringers, so they had that in Stormblood. The interesting thing with these riddles and these shoulder tackles is that when you used Riddle of Fire in Stormblood, you were actually forced to use it in Fists of Fire, which you didn't really care about because that was like a stance buff you just switched to that was just passive. A little bit like your tank stances for tanks now. And it increased your damage done. So you're probably going to use that anyway. An additional thing with Riddle of Fire was that it actually slowed your GCD, so during Riddle of Fire your GCD was actually closer to a normal speed. Riddle of Wind, if I remember correctly, oh yeah, Riddle of Wind wasn't easily accessible in the same way because it was directly tied to your elemental shoulder tackle. Riddle of Earth, of course, switched you to Fists of Earth, which you might not want unless you needed the defensive cooldown, because Fists of Earth reduced damage taken by you. But by virtue of you not being in Fists of Fire now, meant you did less damage. In terms of Riddle of Wind, the way that was interesting was that this shoulder tackle attack, the way that worked was that if you were in Fists of Fire, your shoulder tackle did more damage. Because it was a fire tackle now. And I believe your Fists of Earth like added some damage to it, but I believe it also became a knockback or something weird like that. But Fists of Wind, which increased your movement speed in the same way that ninjas just have passively from, what's it called, Fleet of Foot. Riddle of Wind was when you used Wind Tackle, which did about half the damage of Fire Tackle, it turned into Riddle of Wind, which was Shoulder Tackle. But again, like you could just use Shoulder Tackle twice for the same damage as if you had just used Fire Tackle. Quite silly that. They didn't really give you a reason to be in Riddle of Wind aside of like, Fists of Wind aside from like utility reasons of movement until Shadowbringers, where, just to finish on this thought and history lesson on Monk, where you learned this trait. Now, originally in Shadowbringers, we still had the stacks of Greased Lightning effect, so every time you used a 1-2-3 combo finisher, so either Demolish, Snap Punch, or Rockbreaker, you gained one stack of Greased Lightning, which was your gauge. Each stack increased your damage by, I believe it was 10%, and also gave you like 5% shorter GCD, so 5, 10, 15, 20. However, it only went up to 3 stacks. Unless you were in Fists of Wind, in which case it went up to 4. So that meant that in early days of Shadowbringers, your opener was like be in Fists of Fire for the damage bonus, and then 1 GCD before you would generate the 4th Greased Lightning stack, you went to Fists of Wind, so you could get 4. And because the Greased Lightning stacks increased your damage by 10, 20, 30, 40% damage anyway, the damage difference between Fists of Fire and Fists of Wind was like nothing, right? Actually, the Fists of Wind was better because the GCD reduction. And HK says, sounds overcomplicated, right? Did you know Tornado Kick also ate your Greased Lightning stacks at one point? I think they still did that then. Very strange. See, Gleaming says priority list makes a lot more sense than simply attempting to do a rigid looping rotation, because mechanics will always throw you off your timing, and that is absolutely correct. That is one of the primary problems, in my opinion, with looping rotations, is that if anything gets in your way, you now have to figure out how to get like back on track with your looping rotation. That's why I typically prefer priority rotations. However, that can also just be a symptom of me coming from World of Warcraft, because in World of Warcraft, most specializations use like a priority rotation, right? It's actually weird if a specialization uses a looping rotation in that game, to my knowledge. Like that, it's actually weird. But it's probably also a symptom of them just having an insane amount of procs. Murphy says the fact that those 4 openers are not named after Devil May Cry style names is a sin. Womp womp. That could have been funny. Actually, That reminds me of the... oh, I don't know if they still have it like that. Let me just see. Maybe they do. Oh, it was so funny when I saw it. I'll just see if it's still there before I... Oh. Can I place these? I can't. Oh. Can I only place... I think I can only place them indoors. Oh. Oof. Oh well. You tried. Right, they still have it. If you go to the Balance Discord, go to the Astrologian resources and check at the top the best in slot lists. The one that has the slowest GCD is called Rampardo's Theorem. If any of you are remotely interested in competitive Pokemon at all, there's a chance you will know of, I believe it's called False Swipe Gaming, which is a channel that makes videos on the competitive history of specific Pokemon. And they have this series called insert a specific Pokemon known for an aspect, followed by theorem. And the Rampardo's theorem goes that speed is actually that power isn't everything, because Rampardo's has basically the power to, if anyone could, Rampardo's is probably the one that could one-shot anything the most effectively of any Pokemon. There's just the problem that he has no defense, no health, and no speed, so he'll typically die before he gets the opportunity to do so. So the irony here, or the funny thing with this name, is that the build is called Rampardo's Theorem because it is the slowest build. And not because necessarily it is the strongest build, which I think is really funny. Okay, so I think I just prefer Paladin over Warrior, since they do actually have a rotation during their buff window, unlike Warrior, where you just kind of use everything whenever you fancy for the most time. That's true. That's true. I know... I feel like Warrior has a pretty decent, middle ground solution to the whole 2-minute burst problem. In that Paladin has this thing where they have to merge their rotation with their burst buttons. Warrior just clicks a button and it just goes, here's your burst. Which means that Warrior doesn't have to worry about Warrior about their burst outside of their burst. For the most part, you can still stockpile some beast gauge, you can still save and infuriate, things like that, but most of Warrior's burst is click in a release and then click the flashy button. There you go. Riddle of Water, win. Yeah, why didn't we get Riddle of Water? He said the W word. Yeah, Kitsuneko, I know a good bunch about Pokemon. I was talking with my brother yesterday, and apparently his nephew was on the phone, and apparently that was grounds to play Guess That Pokemon based on description alone. And I got all of them. Just that good. Name every Pokemon in order now. I can't do that. I can't do that. Show me your Pokemon diploma. I don't even have that. I haven't even like bought a mainline Game Freak Pokemon game since Generation 4. It says I can name from Gen 1 to Gen 3 Pokemon in order. In order? Oh boy. Name every build of Dragonite in current meta instead. Is Dragonite in the current meta? If it is, I would guess that it has a Dragon Dance set and just like 4 attacks set. Maybe with a choice item. It might also have a defensive set that does stuff like Stealth Rocks. Let's see. Silvermint says, I would like the Paladin fantasy, but the rotation is wacky to me. Yeah, see, the thing is, in regards to tanks, I love a tank with a shield. I really like that. Just incidentally, I don't always like the way that tank plays, which can be a problem. You like a mage with a shield? I mean, that's nice. In my first playthrough of Stranger of Paradise, I played as mainly a sage, and before DLC, sage could use like mace and a shield. That's it. With DLC, they've since become able to use a staff. They can also use a gun. You won't outsmart my strongest of magics. I call it bullet. Gleaming says, what kind of game is Stranger of Paradise? Because I was convinced it was something in the vein of 7 Remake. I would call it a Souls-like. And I say Souls-like with a heavy emphasis on the like. It's based on like stages. Like you enter a map, you enter a level with a specific mission in mind. And instead of collecting, you know, souls and stuff, you collect gear. It's also like a little bit of like quote-unquote a looter shooter, except it's not a shooter. You can roll, yes. And you gain levels on your jobs. There are 3 tiers of jobs. The first tier is like very comparable to like the base classes in Final Fantasy XIV. For example, you start with a Duelist, which uses daggers, which is basically rogue. You start with Lancer. You start with Pugilist. You start with Marauder. You also start with Sword Fighter, which, it is the one that uses a sword and shield, right? It can become Paladin later on. You also have Swordsman, which uses a greatsword. You also get a katana and a job called Ronin. It later becomes Samurai. And you get a mace, and you can become a mage. Just straight up mage. It can then branch to black, red, and white mage. And black and white mage can then later combine into sage. So like, it's a lot of that. But there's only 3 tiers of jobs. So, for example, you start with mage. You unlock black and white mage. You use both to unlock sage. That is the highest tier. As an example. It's very fun. I think a lot what scared a lot of people away from Stranger of Paradise is that it has a little like there's something weird with the graphics at times, and then it was also an Epic exclusive for a while, which meant that when it finally released on Steam, most people were like, "Oh, is there a gunblade?" No. No gunblades. Unfortunately. Have you played Elden Ring? Nope. I have not. I have Dark Souls 3, but I never completed it. So on that grounds, I was like, well, if I'm ever going to get Elden Ring, I feel like it would be reasonable to like beat like Dark Souls 3 first, for example. Do you want to? And also, I think a lot, what also scared a lot of people away from Stranger of Paradise was that I think a lot of people felt that the part of the story they got to see was dumb. Because it sounded like all you heard was, we're here to kill chaos, or something like that. And that's like part of the story. But it's not the whole story. Something that I've said that I found very problematic when getting into Final Fantasy XIV originally is that I had a really hard time with being interested in the Final Fantasy XIV story when I didn't know if I actually cared about the game at all. Like, here's the thing, a game can have an excellent story, but if the story is excellent and I don't like the gameplay, I'll just watch someone else play it. Like, then I don't have to be the one playing. But since I am the one playing in that moment, if I don't know if I care about the gameplay yet, then I don't care about the story. So I didn't get very far in Final Fantasy XIV before I started skipping, because I wanted to see if I liked the story. And it took a while to get me back. Stranger of Paradise has, like, they spent a bit of time, like, setting up the story, but it, like, amounts to, like, 5 to 10 minutes. And then most of it is just stages, a little bit of story, stage, story, stage, and it's very little story. Like, each stage you can spend over 30 minutes in a single stage if you're not rushing it. So if there's like 5 minutes of a cutscene, or even 2 or 3 minutes of a cutscene in between that, that's not so bad, is it? And because Stranger of Paradise has this start of a protagonist that does not care about the opponent, does not want to hear their life story, will actually do the equivalent of pressing skip for you, works really well if you don't know if you care about the game, like, or the game's story yet, because that means that the game starts very soft on the story and just lets you play the game. And then they can start getting really weird with it, with the story later, when they're like, well, you have played for 10 hours, you probably are invested by now. Oh, Xanadus, it's not a matter of, oh, I have to complete Dark Souls 3 first because it came before Elden Ring. It has nothing to do with that. The reason why I'm saying I should probably complete Dark Souls 3 first is more because, well, they're both like Souls games. And if I didn't like the one that I already have enough to actually complete the thing or barely play the thing, then why should I buy another one? Right? I might not get very far in Elden Ring. Like, it's basically like saying, well, finish your plate before you ask for another one. To myself. And it's not like I don't have that much time to play Dark Souls necessarily, but it's not like I don't have time. Like, I have completed the story, like the playthrough story, like not post game, but just like the leveling story, you could say, of Stranger of Paradise, like 3 or 4 times at least. I could have at least traded 1 or 2 of those to play some more Dark Souls if that's what I wanted. But a key thing with the story stuff that I was talking about is, if I like the gameplay of a game, I can look past the story being done. I can do that. But if the gameplay is bad and I like the story, then YouTube gives me the incredibly convenient ability to just not play it and still get the story. Like, I can just watch someone else play it who might actually enjoy the gameplay. Which is why the gameplay is more important, that that's on point if I'm the one playing. Otherwise, I can just have someone else play for me. And that's also a pretty funny one, Murfolk. From Stormblood on what I really felt like, am I not like the most powerful thing here? Why do I gotta deliver stuff? I think the reason there is, well, in Stormblood there is a reasonable argument of having you deliver stuff, because sending the Warrior of Light with the thing is like sending an entire guarded security detail with the transport, and also the transport can teleport, which is a lot more effective than sending literally anyone else in this war zone that Stormblood happens in. Like, why do I have to deliver stuff? Well, aside from being the most powerful thing here, you're also the fastest thing here. Slayer of Gods, could you deliver this letter to my brother on the other side of this room? I think an argument there, HK, so HK says you gotta deliver stuff because the developers don't know how to pad out expansions. Without delivering things, expansions would be 60% shorter. You know that's extremely exaggerated, but furthermore, part of the reason why you're told to deliver things is also to give reason why you'd be there. Like, the way that they get your character into position to happen to be in the spot where they need to be when things happen is partly by having you go there for some reason. But if they can't use a delivery quest, then they have to give you a different reason. And wouldn't it be equally annoying if every single time you had to go somewhere, you're already late? Because the reason they're sending you is because there's a primal on the loose already. And you're late. Again. The fastest, most secure transport spent 3 months stationed in Limsalom. They're just getting ready. Remember, just saying, so I see guys are asking for a link. You cannot post links in the stream chat. You can post them on Discord, but not in the stream chat, due to bots. Himia says, can I post clips of Baldur's Gate 3? I mean, you can, but I don't know how significant. Like, I can't guarantee that we will see them. They might not be as significant. If it's just something you'd like to share with people, you can always just, post it in a not clip review room, and then people can react to it. But if it's about sharing it for the stream specifically, then you would of course put it on the clip review. But as I've said in the pinned comment, I can't guarantee that I'll check it. If it isn't Final Fantasy XIV or something specifically relevant. Do we have some clips to review this week? We do. Absolutely. I'll get to that in just a moment. Matthew says, I do wonder what they're going to do for Dawntrail. I do indeed wonder. As long as we don't know for sure what's happening, that's a pretty good sign. I think, just to finish on this with the story, I feel like the reason why a lot of people... there are a lot of people that didn't particularly like the Endwalker story. And I think the reason, at least in part, is because they expected it to go in a specific way because of what they already knew. What I mean by that is because people already kind of knew what the story was going to be about, and they had already like decided how they wanted it to end. Like, not like in full detail, but like, I expect to fight this guy in this area, and then that's not the ending. And I'm pretty sure, to not get into too deep detail, because I know there's some people in the chat who has not finished the Endwalker story. What people thought was going to be the end of the Endwalker leveling story happens at like level 84. So the rest of the story is people going like, what's going on now? I thought this was the build up, and then the finale for them already happened, right? Final Fantasy 14 is actually just a dating app. Well, it is a very social app, isn't it? Right. Should we check some clips? Just checking, is Cole here? Because what we do on these streams of the tea time streams is when I start to like review clips, I usually want to try and make sure that the person who posted the clip is actually here before I do it. So that so that they also get to experience the reaction. And I know that I have both a clip from... I have a clip from Caetsu, a clip from Cole, a clip from Gleaming Gamora, and a clip from Gazel, a clip from Sergeant Blaine, and a clip from Jet. Lucas says Final Fantasy can also be so lonely at the same time. Absolutely. It is quite funny how it can be like that with MMOs. That even though there's all these people around you, especially in like cities, they like you're somehow alone in a crowd, right? And that's like a part of how we play games now. A lot of people don't actually communicate in game. Do you think we'll be doing a lot of walking along a trail at Dawntrail in the next expansion? That at dawn in the next expansion, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Did we actually walk to the end? We actually did. We did walk up to the end in Endwalker, didn't we? Exactly, Silvermint. Alone together. No, that's for roast me Saturdays. Generally, if you post a clip for these streams and I review it, I'm not here to like make fun of what you did. I'm mainly here to like give advice. If it starts reaching a point where it seems like I'm making fun of you, that's not intentional. It's more to like add some lightheartedness to what's happening. Like, for example, if you're making a specific mistake repeatedly, then I can either mention it once and never again, or I can mention it every time. And at some point, I might start mentioning it because it's funny. But I'm not here to, like, ridicule anyone. Exactly, TBN. TBN. Streamer making fun of people seeking his help. Would you imagine? It is at least not intentional if I do that. Right. I actually have a question in regards to the clip that you sent, Caetsu. Is that like a voice line that you added to the clip afterwards? Because I checked, like, as I always do, I check a few seconds to see that everything's working. And I hear a voice line. And I don't recognize it, so I'm asking, is that something that you added, like, post? Oh, it's HK. Fair enough. Right. Well, we can start with Caetsu's clip, which is, doesn't have a name. I'm blocking the chat. Quitting is mitigation. It is. So, if I remember correctly, from the bit I saw, I'm pretty sure we're supposed to be looking at player 4 here, the samurai. Yes, this is the 5 AM one, I believe. But it did take me needing to look for everyone else to realize that. Actually, there's sound in this, so let me just... There you go. So, follow the sprout, right?
Yeah, my boy is struggling a little bit. Boy? Hello?
And...
He didn't even move!
He didn't even hesitate. He didn't even hesitate. He just went, "My time has come." And just died. You sounded so sad, HK. He didn't even move. He wasn't even trying. See, the weirdest thing with that is that the first time the boss makes the big snowballs, it only summons one big snowball. So either the samurai was not paying attention through the entire fight, or something happened there. Like, the boss had already showed how the mechanic works. That's really funny. It sounded so it sounded almost staged. That's why I asked. Like it sounded like someone had found like the perfect voice line from like a clip somewhere. But I was really like, see the thing I did when I like initially clicked on the like check the clip was I was looking, what's the people that I know doing? Like, maybe it's them that I'm looking at. Maybe they are the ones doing the funny. And it took me a few goes to realize, oh, it's the samurai. And by that point, I already realized that I had reacted to the clip. So the best I can do is go, well, this is what happens. Maybe the samurai just like radioactive orange juice spills. Oh boy! The telegraphs are telling me where to stand, right? Right then. Let's do Gleaming Gamora's clip next. So, here it is. Just general gameplay overview. There is game sound. Can't take damage when you're dead. Oh boy. Does the frames stabilize later, Gleaming? Just checking. 5 a.m., 5 FPS. Next one will be 5p. It'll just be like one blob. It's frame by frame. Gives you time to analyze it. That's intentional. Ah. Smart. Right. So this is going to be difficult. Because there's a lot of skips here. So it's hard for me to see if if it's something that I can't see, if it's something that you actually missed. But we could start with this. You did start with TBN on pull as is like recommended. Unfortunately, I think TBN actually doesn't manage to pop because of Athena just being lazy. That is of course very easy to see in retrospect, but so in my Dark Knight guide, I do recommend as the opener in an actual fight that you start with TBN then Blood Weapon. Naturally, if the TBN isn't breaking or has no opportunity to break, then there might be no reason to. Like if the boss doesn't actually attack for the first 10 seconds, then you're just taking 3k MP and just throwing out the window. This is like, I'm not saying, oh, you messed up in retrospect. I'm more saying, now that you know that the boss isn't actually capable of breaking your TBN at the very start, you might benefit in future from not using TBN in your opener on Athena. Alternatively, you can use TBN when she uses on the soul afterwards, if you still have MP to do that. You might even want to use it on like a healer or something, because then it's more likely to break. But yeah, it makes sense if you if your computer doesn't have the energy to both record and also play the game, then I can see how this can happen. I'll try my best. Did you have a lag spike there? You moved in time as far as I can see. What happened? Well, at least you use TBN in anticipation of that. But that is actually a decent strategy if you use TBN on a black mage that you know is really greedy. That tends to be very effective. Something you could do... I'm relatively certain, Steve, that Gleaming was playing on a stable frame rate, but the recording just got borked. But yeah, if you are playing with like a black mage that seems to like eat damage whenever they go, well, I can survive this. Then you might benefit as a Dark Knight to just go, I'll just TBN them. It was a joke. Fair enough. So I do have one suggestion that you might, that your teams might appreciate, and I'm sure you can. You already know what I'm talking about when you see this Gleaming. So, of course, everyone has to be looking at the boss and what it's doing, and so it's each individual's problem to realize where exactly the line is. And sometimes the boss will use this mechanic, but does this like half room cut a few times where you don't have a chance to move into position in time. And that's just how it is. But here, right at the start, or whenever the boss perfectly lines up with this center line, it is extremely helpful if you make sure that this arrow here, indicating where the boss is looking, is on the line. Because if you do that, then this line will line up with this line. Like this particular thing it's very common for people right in the start of the fight to get caught off guard by that. That's why people often try extremely hard to make sure that Athena always faces north if they can help it, because then at least it's half the room in that specific way, especially if you can have her in the center, because then it lines up with this line. But to do that, you have to decisively stand there on the line. And being at a slight angle doesn't help. It doesn't help anyone in particular. There's a TPN. Was that a double TPN because you have 2 Dark Knights? That is very awkward. So, you said, Gleaming, I just want to add something. You said that your computer had a hard time handling it. If your computer is having a hard time recording full 1080p, next time you might be able to make a more stable recording if you record at a lower quality. You can do that. It's a lot more helpful if we have like a stable frame rate, even if everything's foggy. Because the problem is that I have a hard time seeing the frames that I don't see. You could try that. And yes, Gazel says, because you're the tank, you can easily see the arrow and eyeball where you have to stand, or see where you have to stand in relation to Athena. But the DPS and healers, they're just looking at this huge open thing. It's a little harder to eyeball it. But that's like a classic thing. Wait a minute. Oh, never mind. For some reason I was like, did you use your first Living Shadow 2 minutes in? But that couldn't be. You did your opener, right? I just didn't notice in the opener because I was looking at something else. And there's the knockback. And then, so of course, here I would recommend you go back to, I would recommend you go back on this line. Like, every time the boss is free to move, if you're the main tank, it is generally a really good idea to try and force her to face north. If she's standing in the middle, even better if you can if you can just stand on the line. Like, this fight, because it's a boss fight, and it's normal difficulty, for me, the best advice I can give is are you doing your rotation right? For example, I can see that you didn't use Delirium alongside Blood Weapon. You should have done that. You haven't been using Plunge. You should have done that. But aside from that, most of it is, are you positioning right? Are you getting hit by mechanics? Could you use a resource to protect someone else? Like, for example, using TBN on other people. Yeah, you should be using Delirium on cooldown, and Plunge, at least you should use one every 30 seconds so you don't sit on 2 stacks. That's just losing damage. Now you use Delirium. I guess you either remembered, or that was when you wanted to use it. Oh boy. Oh boy, Carbon Spit and Salted Earth, come now. Oh man. But yeah, the thing is, and this is of course something that you learn with practice, is, so you do the opener right. Once you've done the opener right, you need everything that doesn't have a charge system, you need to use on cooldown. Pretty much. Hey Shiro, hope you're doing well. So Delirium, Blood Weapon, Carbon Spit, Salted Earth, and Southern Darkness, they have to come out on cooldown. Living Shadow has to come out on cooldown. Things with charges, you either make sure that you use, Plunge once every 30 seconds so that you sit on at most 1 stack or 1 charge in case you need it. Or you use them in pairs every minute. Or you use them every 30 seconds and then you save 2 of them for the 2-minute burst if you want to like do that. The same applies with Shadowbringer, where you like stack 2 of them and then use them in bursts. Just like how you can stockpile MP to use in bursts, and you can stockpile Blood Gauge to use in bursts. But all of these things are like extra stuff. They do lead to slightly more damage, especially if there are raid buffs. In this particular party, I see a Divination, possibly a card if your Astrologian likes you, a Arcane Circle, a Battle Voice, and Radiant Finale. So like there's a little bit of stuff to be gained here if they all use their buffs in the 2-minute burst, which you can't guarantee. It's normal content. But using your stuff on cooldown at the very least will lead to you doing the maximum possible damage you can do. And there was the Carbon Spit, and Salted Earth was also used, and you did use Plunge once. And now the boss, I think it's actually on the line. I think it is. I'm pretty sure it is. Nope. Nope. And why is that? Because I can hardly see the arrow, I think. Gazel says I might have missed, but is Gleaming using Reprisal and Dark Missionary? Gleaming says I was not, and I should have been. That was something I learned to do more often this past week during Golbus Extreme. There you go. Perfect. As you said, if you use Reprisal more, like whenever the boss uses something that is a raid-wide attack, Reprisal if you have it. You can also use Dark Missionary if you know it's magic. You can also try if you're not sure if it is magic or not. But then you'll know for next time, because of the stave that appears for magic attacks. An interesting thing I want to highlight about this particular stage in the fight is this happens 4 minutes into the fight. 4 minutes. Like right around the burst window. Like right around when people want to use their cooldowns. So you're in this awkward position of, do I use them or do I not? You can use them because the boss leaves right as new mobs come up. Just be aware that you might have to like switch from single target to AoE in the middle of your burst, which can be a little jarring for some people. And that is also true, as Shiro says. You can't actually use Reprisal for the ultimate cast, but you can use Dark Missionary. I don't think there's anything to say here. You might be thinking, oh, these ants, they're very scary. Is there something I can do better about their positioning? And I've done this boss at least over 24 times. And most of the time, I'm pretty sure I usually tank it. And I have no idea. Like, with the boss going in and putting spread markers on everyone randomly and then also these things cleaving, I think if people aren't getting killed by it, you're already doing pretty well. So I just wanted to highlight that I'm not saying anything here. It's just I don't think there's anything you can safely guarantee is a good strategy for these. It's just try and do as much damage as you can and get rid of them. I liked the attempt of using Unmend. And now is of course right around now you should use Dark Missionary. Use Ablation, that is also something. You could also use Ablation on someone else actually. I think the other tank did that. Used Ablation on both healers. Interesting. Salted Earth? Oh, it's really hard to see exactly here. Wait. I think I actually saw a mistake there. Yeah, you missed a Soul Eater because you reset your combo when the next step was Soul Eater. that was a random spot there. Yeah, this is actually a pretty good example of a time where you might not be able to like position Athena right, because when does she use her wings? Now. No chance of positioning that. Like, the only way to position that right is if you let yourself get hit by the donut AoE. So like this is what I meant when I said there will be times in the fight where you can't position her right. You just have to like let it be. And I don't think there's going to be anything much more that I would be able to You say you go blind? What do you mean? Did you get hit by the wings and I didn't notice? Okay. I am wondering, do you have significant latency gleaming? Because this is the second time where I see you move and then get hit anyway. Do you have like, can you only single weave safely? It seems like you can double weave. And that is really weird. You were that you get hit by something that really looks like lag. Yeah, I have seen your question, Xanadus. I'll answer that after this clip. I think we are there's a little bit left. I am surprised that the wings hit, because I don't feel like they're that aggressive, Shiro, but maybe that's just... See, I would be able to defend you a little better if I could see more here. So something that I want to highlight is that I often, like, when I'm in this fight, I often have to, like, I can't just look at where the chains are pointing, because with the stuff happening on the screen, I sometimes have difficulty actually seeing which platforms are blinking. So I have to, like, find the pattern of safe platforms, because I need to know which, like, where the safe spot is. So I can understand how you would make that mistake, but it is funny. However, I wish we had more frames of the funny. Well, it looks like you weren't the only person going blind here. You know, if I had been the healer in this situation, I just want to highlight, if I was the healer right here, I would actually be inclined to say just limit break. Like, there's a healer down, there's 2 tanks down. That might be a little excessive, but I absolutely say this would be a decent time to just like healer LB3, just get the tanks up now, because you need them now. And healer LB3 will get the tanks up standing quicker than raising them one at a time. And yeah, Gleaming actually suggested the healer LB. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. The other tank is not feeling confident. They have Living Dead up. But despite everything, it looks like you've got it. Is there anything left in the fight, or do you just get it now? Watch this. I've done the pro strat. I've sped it up so that we have less frames to miss. Ah. What happened there? Ah. You actually ended up shining brilliant for her. Shine brilliant for me! That's what I call that mechanic. I don't even call it Parthenos. Shiro says, it's not this part of the script, but I'm really uncomfy with you holding Athena at the edge of the arena there. If she starts wings there, everyone is screwed. Screen fades to black. Screen comes back. I think people are in position. I think they can do it, but like, see, there's still like a fourth or a third of the arena. So a thing that I just want to highlight, I'm guessing that you decided that it was fine because the boss is almost dead, and I mean she's busy doing a stack marker, but I just want to remind, just a little quick reminder, this buff, the yellow one with a man in it, makes you completely impervious to damage. Only damage. It's like a free invuln. But it does not block anything that, doesn't care about damage. So a knockback can still knock you back if it doesn't need to do damage to you to knock you back and things like that. It can also apply debuff to you and stuff. But this buff lasts until you click anything other than movement. If you click blood weapon, gone. So generally, the advice here is wait for healing. Or wait until the 5 seconds are up before you do anything. If you know you're not getting healing, that is of course a different story entirely. But yeah, normally wait for healing if you can. But I'm guessing that what you saw was this and thought, it'll probably be fine. And then you also see the stack marker. Either, like, the trick with that stack marker is either option 1, you get healing and you participate in the stack marker, or option 2, you don't get healing and you don't participate in the stack marker, and just then those that are participating will hopefully live it. There you go. That was like a frame 1 leave. like someone left the group on frame 1. Just busted light party. It didn't say duty complete, it said light party. I'm not sure how they did that either. My best guess is Fight Club reasons. But I think that went pretty well. It's a little hard to see. The main things that I would say is remember to use your cooldowns on cooldown. Remember to use like raid-wide defenses when there is an opportunity to. It's free mitigation for everyone else. But otherwise, I think it went pretty well. If your computer's having trouble recording at a stable frame rate, it might help to like reduce the quality so that it isn't like I would rather have a 360p stable frame rate than a 1080p where I'm having a hard time seeing what's happening. Because usually we can like sort of see, even with the like 4K graphics or if, like lower pixel rate and stuff, we can still see what's going on. Whereas if we only get like a third or a fourth of the frames, then it can sometimes be hard. There are like some points in the clip here where something big was happening, where it like just completely froze on us, right? But yeah, I think you did well, Gleaming. You also said you beat Golbus EX, right? So that's already good. I'm guessing you learned a lot from that as well. We call that foreshadowing. Right, so Xanadu said, here's a question I would like answered. Why is Hades EX so rare to find party finder parties for? Trying to get my Shadowbringer's Robo Whip. Is it common to see old extreme parties in party finders? Like, is that a standard thing? Is that a standard thing? Like, I actually haven't, like, I'm not using this as a reason to say, oh, you're wrong. It's just funny that we specifically have Hades Extreme right here. But I see two Shadowbringers Extremes. I can, however, I think I might be able to explain why Hades is rare. The Hades fight takes an obnoxious amount of time because it has, like, let's see, I think is it 4? See, we have Hades, then intermission 1, so add 1, then there's also the pair, then the prime, and then the big boss. The 1, 2, 3, yeah, it has 4 mandatory phase switches that each take time, and you can't skip them. You can't. So the Hades fight has, like, even if you're speed running through it and doing as much damage as you feasibly can, it takes a long time. And I should know, given that I think I did it like 45 times or something like that. I can't remember if there's an achievement for doing it 50 times or something like that. Sometimes there are these things. Maybe it's only for raids. Might be only for raids. But I did it over 40 times. And most of them we did on stream. So I can see why people wouldn't be interested in Hades Extreme. Part of the reason why the weapon material to make the glowy weapons from Hades are so insanely expensive compared to some other ones is for the exact same reason. Because it's really tedious to farm them. Yeah, that is true. HK. I do believe that was the first stream you saw. Was it was a mount farming stream, but it became Hades only because we spent so much time there. Unfortunately. Shiro says people don't want to do Hades EX because of how long it takes him to wake his brethren from the dream of a dark tomorrow. They should really invest in an alarm clock. That's pretty good. That is pretty good. Viech says, if you have the option to play on console, it should be more consistent there. At least on PS5, it's no problem to play and record. Well, I mean, I would imagine that the specs of a PS5 would be perfectly capable of running Final Fantasy XIV very smoothly while still having excess, like, computer capacity to also record. I can only imagine that to be the case. So if Gleaming is playing with a older PC or, you know, a decent PC, then it might be harder. But it to me, it's fine. Like that's why I'm not saying buy new equipment. I'm just saying maybe like reduce the quality if that helps with resulting in a more stable recording. That could help. Right. So next we have. I hope some of those tips helped you, Gleaming. I know you basically had like a big training arc of going into Golbus Extreme, possibly after that clip, but I still hope some of it was helpful. So let's see. Oh, there's chapters here. But they were just your deaths, fair enough. Right, so Gazel says, any way to heal more efficiently? What cooldown is best in what situation? Any advice is appreciated. Also, there's extra information in the description. Right, there's no sound in these clips, right? Right. Can we do something about that? No, it's fine. Oh, Sip is here. And Ardell is here. Right, so this Puppet's Bunker, Puppet's Bunker is actually really mean at times. Has some challenging, difficult mechanics and some things that you can easily mess up. So I can try and focus a bit on those. What exactly is best to use when can vary. Depends on how much healing you need to do, how much resources you have to work with. It's always easy in hindsight to go, oh, I could have spent that on energy drains. The best I can do is say what I would do in the moment if you do something that I wouldn't do. But if I see a mechanic that you're like having a hard time dealing with, then I might be able to give advice on that. Because many of the mechanics in this particular raid has are not entirely clear. Something that I would highly advise, as someone already did here, is put down team markers, because if you die from falling off the arena, which can happen, you land here. So it's easier to find your way back to your team if there's like a clear indicator for that. Like, it's not even to like say go to your spot, it's genuinely because it can be hard to find your way home otherwise. Right, there's the tank buster. Not much you can do about that. So this mechanic is an easy one to trick you, and it's very hard to know where you're supposed to go in the moment, because the safe spot is typically the ones that close, like that open faster. But it's not very, like you can see over there, I can't even see, is that a safe spot? Like, that stopped at like an inch left, and if you stood there, you die. If you stand here or here, you're fine. Like, that's how mean it can be sometimes. Like, you really need to pay attention here. So far, not much. So here, just a tip that I usually do is, it's reasonably obvious where the safe spot is, but just to be sure, there isn't really any other reason to use your knockback immunity in this fight. So I typically use my knockback immunity in anticipation of this. It doesn't use this mechanic very often, so you will typically have Surecast for that. Not that you had to, you were in good position. But the thing is, the attack itself will not kill you. The knockback will. Which killed 1, 2, 3, 4 players in other alliances. But that's just a tip, that's what I normally do. And you put Excog on Zip. That's probably fine. Normally in a... Did that target Zip? In a trial or raid, like something where you have 8 players, I'm much more likely to just not use excogitation unless I know the tank will need it. Like, I'll just save it. Because sometimes the tank will not actually take any meaningful amount of damage. This is not completely true. It can be true. It's not always exactly true. But in savage raids, sometimes in extremes, it is commonly agreed upon that tanks can often get by on the residual healing from having to heal everyone else anyway. So you could choose to maybe not use Excog. You're trying to do something other than Energy Drain. That's fair. And I'm not saying that it's a bad idea. I'm just saying the reason why I might not actually use Executation is because maybe you didn't need to do it. Maybe. I don't even know. Like, that's the thing with Excogitation. Who knows? Maybe Sip takes a bunch of damage. And then it was a good idea. So there you could have moved forward because that was closer. That's a minor thing, again. And you moved into position in time. Yeah, you might want to cast some healing on Cryo here. But other than that, maybe the other healer did that. Good choice. Moving in good time. And there's a raid wide. So there you could use Lost Raid. Didn't seem to be necessary. Wait, what actually happened? We have the raid wide. Okay, so it wasn't you doing anything because you were busy dumping ether flow. I would absolutely have used Indomitability. Sorry, not Lost Raid. Indomitability. I would have used Indomitability here, just in case. The thing is, the White Mage was probably just sitting there waiting for a reason to use a Flatus Rapture, right? Sacred Soil was also fine. The reason why I would have said Indomitability is just because it's instant healing after the raid wide, and you had quite a lot of resources, so you could do that. But Sacred Soil is also fine. Ah, okay, now I see it. Yeah, you used Sacred Soil in anticipation of the raid wide. That's my bad. That is absolutely also good. Yeah, you could have done both, but I don't think you needed to do both, and the other healer almost certainly had a thing as well. I don't really see anything like particularly problematic or anything you might want to change here. I don't really see anything. A thing that might be worth highlighting is you have a full fairy gauge, so you can consider using like Ether Pact more aggressively. Shiro says Indomitability might have been a bit wasteful there. It would absolutely have been wasteful given that we saw that everyone immediately healed up. As I said, it looked like the other healer did a thing. But it depends on what you need. And Shiro also mentions Fey Blessing. That is also something you could have used. I have mentioned in my, I believe I mentioned it in my Scholar Guide, that making use of your pets options first, so that you have Ether Flow, is often a better idea, because your Ether Flow can be, you know, transferred to damage if you don't need them, whereas Fey Blessing is just Fey Blessing. Someone died there. And I don't know if you want Indomitability paired with Recitation usually, like probably. It is certainly in a raid, it is the best way to use Recitation, but you like remember Indomitability has a 30-second cooldown, so you might not actually want every Indomitability to be Recitation. It depends on how much AoE healing you need. As you said, it might have been wasteful to use Indomitability. It seems like there isn't really... Uh-oh. Oh. Wait, what? What happened there? Let's see. We have the dashes with the knockback. So see, here is where, again, it becomes mildly relevant. What I mentioned earlier is use surecast, because sometimes you're going to get this wrong. Like, I always use surecast if it's available, because you might get this wrong. And then what happens, it looks like, is you get shoved. Was that a lag spike? Is that what happened? Oh, you didn't move in time. I am surprised that killed you. I am surprised that just killed you. I don't remember that it does that much damage. But if you had used surecast, you might have been fine here. But yeah, what happened is, as you can see right here, now it has already snapshotted. That's what went wrong ultimately. And that of course did damage, and then you took an extra 20k. Like this, the fire there doesn't one-shot you, but it does a lot of damage, so you can't take both mistakes at once without healing back up. That is a pretty disastrous right there. Huh. Looks like the Black Mage just cut its losses and just respawned. But overall, that went fine right up until that unlucky overlap. I can't even remember that there was an overlap of the like flybys with the knockback fires. I don't remember that ever being a thing. So this pack, there is only one really big thing about it. The three big boys, the three chonkers here, you need to interrupt them. You have to interrupt them. And you have to interrupt all three. Because if you don't, then they will paralyze everyone. And all three of them do this. So even if you do it perfectly on your end, it doesn't work. And the reason why this almost never works is because everyone just dogpiles all the mobs in one big stack, and then no one has any idea which one is your team's, right? No one has even the faintest clue which one you're supposed to be fighting. It's just a mosh pit. But it's not like disastrous, just a pack. And you can of course also make use of Limit Break here for some AoE damage. And this is your reminder, kids, to carry... Was it Spinal Drops? Spine Drops. That is a pretty good idea. It never occurred to me that you can just buy paralysis removal. That makes sense. You can also bring antidotes. It's very rare that you run into an encounter where the poison is painful enough that you need to remove it, and the poison is removable. So something I just want to mention about this fight. And this is something, if you do Puppet Spunker a lot or have done it a bunch, a huge tip to increase your success rate on this fight is just when the fight is about to begin, as you're running up here, just mention that the line stack can reach the other alliances. I have multiple times done this to have the response from people going, what, really? What? Like, people not realizing that, yeah, if you point the beam over here, this group dies too. Or rather, then this group dies because of the overlap. Granted, you're also putting a target on your back for trolls that go, oh, I didn't even think of that. That's hilarious. And then they try to do that. But at least when the rest of the alliance realizes, oh, we don't want to put them there, there's a chance that people will refuse to stand in the stack marker if it's pointed badly, or healers will like yank the memer away and things like that. I have had this one time where a different alliance just decimated my entire alliance. I was like, I actually went into the chat and was like, okay, so are you proud of yourself? So who's going to heal my alliance now? We have a tank and 1 DPS. Are you going to rest me then? And then I see like both healers and like a red mage or something from the alliance that killed my team come over and just rest everyone. Just oops. So that happens. It happens, and it isn't always intentional or trolls, but like just pro tip, just mention it before the fight starts, because there's a reasonable chance that people don't know, and that's why they do it. Ricardo Maggi says, I feel like, at least in my experience, mentioning that gets at least one group killed. In my experience, when I've mentioned it, a group has not died to being lasered. When I haven't mentioned it, there's usually one that like gets lasered. Seems like no one got lasered there. So it's like, it's a risk, because of course mentioning it means that people might realize. But on the other hand, equally, the trolls might know beforehand, so you could never win. Like, the trolls would have been prepared beforehand. VX says you're legally obligated to troll back if that happens. The problem is that this fight is usually not so long that you get to see... Like, maybe you see a second one of those lasers, but usually you don't. So you might not have the opportunity to. And even if you do, the problem is that the individual troll... Wait, what happened over there? The individual troll might not, you know, reflect the actions of the entire alliance. So... You know, you shoot an entire alliance because one person was trying to be funny. What happened there? Did they get caught by the laser? Oh. Both healers dead and a Reaper at death's door. I don't think they're going to live that. Are healers back up? Tank is nearly dead. Both healers back up. Tank is recovering. How is that Reaper still alive? And here it comes. 4 down, I think. Yep. Good call on running to the other alliance to help them. Like, just the one raise, you don't have much, but it's better than nothing. I would recommend, if given that you have the ether flow to spare, you know, just give them a lost rate. Just, you know, little lost rate to get them up and going. I would recommend doing that. But other than that, like, it's not required. You went and did extra work, Gazel, by going over and helping the other team. Like, of course, we help each other, but ultimately you're like in your party and they're in their party. So anything you did give them was like extra. Oh. I'm guessing you just saw it wrong. Yeah, already here. So we have right, left, right. It's the same mechanic as Athena, actually. Just did like with a different coat of paint, you could say. Oh, and you get hit twice in a row and it's over. That happens. It's a very punishing mechanic, so there's like, the only thing you can say there is, you know, of course, like, it's very difficult to give advice on that. Just do the mechanic right. You know, it happens. Don't worry about it. I was looking at the Alliance A list and couldn't see the mechanic. Oh. You know, I get that. I get that. Are they going to be okay? Oh no! The answer is no. We have 3 healers alive. You get raised, and because there's no like alliance markers, there's no ABC down, you might not immediately realize that you're not in your alliance. Does your alliance have a different color set? Oh. Did you get yoinked? Did you get yoinked? It looked like you got yoinked. Yep, your co-healer's like, what are you doing over there? Get over and help me. It's pretty funny. Now, unfortunately, you didn't get a good chance to recover. So something, that is something that I would like to mention is, from here, this is, you know, the one mistake you messed up the mechanic. So you get raised. You're still in the same, like, mistake. You need to heal, like, someone needs to heal you. That someone could be you. And you could use, you know, emergency tactics at Curium if you don't believe anyone else is going to do it. But you need healing. Did you get hit by the circle AoE? Didn't you have, like... I'm pretty sure you weren't standing in it. Maybe you were. Oh, you were. But yeah, same mistake. My suggestion here, because I can see what happened there, is you were trying to write something. Is, if someone, like, while you're dead on the floor, you can, you know, apologize for having died or whatever it is, or explain what happened. When you're raised, fight. Like, play a game. If you start trying to, like, explain yourself or apologize or say thank you, then you die again. You don't really have time to, like, most players don't have time to write at that moment. So I would just say, just obviously you appreciate that the healer rests you, and you obviously appreciate that the other healer grabbed you, so that you get back on track and all that. You can always thank them afterwards. But this is like a common way I've seen that people like die again, is that they're trying to talk. And my best advice there is just, you know, take the conversation afterwards. And see, there, of course, you just got back up after a raid wipe. You could use recitation, indomitability here. You could do that. But it does seem like the other healer has it covered. I think it looked, so it was Medica 2, maybe also in a Flatus Rapture. But they seem to have it covered. The advantage of having a white mage in the group when things aren't going great. Like, if there is a healer that is really good at dealing with it when there's a lot of damage being taken, is white mage. They just have infinite amounts of healing that they can just dish out. It's fine. It comes at a DPS loss, but it's fine. It's casual content. There's no DPS, like, there's no DPS check. We're good. But yeah, that I would say, just, you know, thanks afterwards. Sorry while you're dead. Those kinds of things. Because otherwise the boss is just going to do the classic, oh, that person is riding, let me just place a circle AoE under them. Oops. And then you die. And it happens. Don't worry about it. The thing is, I don't have that much advice I can give to you on like using your resources more efficiently. You are using Sacred Soil incredibly aggressively, which is a good thing, because Sacred Soil is like your best healing button as a scholar. Like, if aside from like using your pet actions, Sacred Soil is so incredibly good that, like, if it didn't have a cooldown, you might sometimes feel incentivized to just use it every 15 seconds if you could. It's so insanely good if people are standing in it. It's like 50% better than Indomitability, and it costs the same. And that's ignoring the damage reduction it applies. So here comes the, in my opinion, like the real group slayer. So I'm very curious how it goes with the monitors here. As it says, I was rushing since I saw my change stratagem was all up already. Ah. Yeah. You know, on that, if we just take a moment on that, I think you should still focus on healing yourself up and then look at offense. Although I can see the benefit in using change stratagem on cooldown. I can see that. But I would recommend for future reference, if you just died and you got rest, focus on like stabilizing, and then we can look at change stratagem. Like, regardless of what healer you're playing, if so much damage is coming in that people are going to die if you don't do something, then that takes precedence over everything. Like, if you've seen me play Astrologian on Small Kai, you might not, given that you've often been in the groups, so you haven't been able to watch much in the content in a way. But if I will, you know, I'll do in like a dungeon, I'll be like doing the card burst, card for you, and divination, all that. But sometimes what happens is I go card for you, oh, tank is dying, and just drop everything on the floor and start healing the tank. Because that's more important than damage. And that also applies with change stratagem. It's usually not as involved, it's just one OGCD, right? But that, like that's just my recommendation, is like, make sure that you're not going to die from using change stratagem. Just prioritize your survival first, is my recommendation. Ryan says, when you're raised, apologize for accepting the raise and living again. Yeah, exactly, HK. Oh no, drops Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Gazel says, I remember the mechanics on this one, but I could do better on the healing. Let's see. Nice. Oh. So you could do something for Cryo here. For example, you could give them a lost rate, but that seems to be unnecessary. And see, the thing is, because there's two healers, every time I can say you can do X, there's also the flip side of me saying the white mage could do Y. So I can only say maybe you should do something. You could put Ether Pact on Aradel or the black mage. But no need. Oh dear. And the excogitation timed out, unfortunately. That's how it is. And here you could use... Do you have Fey Blessing on cooldown? Fey Blessing could be used here. But you also put down, say, Sacred Soil. So, maybe not. So this is a common thing I've noticed with Scholar, is that because many of your resources are like... I mean, you could also just not do anything and then you can use energy drain more. It means that often what you should be doing with your resources is like, well, you could heal, but maybe your co-healer does something about it instead, and in which case you don't have to do anything. And if your co-healer is a white mage, they're sitting there like, alright, I have 3 lilies. I sure hope people will take damage. And you're sitting there like, I have 3 ether flow, I sure hope no one takes damage. So like, these two play styles are not at odds with each other. They're actually very synergistic in the way that the white mage wants to do all the work in this case, and the scholar would rather not But there's not much you can do about that. By the way... Oh, you use dissipation. I'm sitting there like, what happened to your pet? Girl says this boss nearly wiped me like 3 times. Finding safe spots is hard. It is, and this boss is it has a mix-up. The reason why I recognize this boss as so hard is because of the amount of players it kills, but also because the first time I did this boss, we had a 24-man pre-made, and we made a drinking game out of it. And this was the first boss we wiped on. And it was also the first boss I died on. And I think I died like 5 times, and I was a healer. And I was apparently the most reliable healer. So every time I died, whoever had a rest just went like, take it, get Kai back up. Which meant that I just got up, died again. Got up, died again. Because I couldn't stabilize. So I recognize this boss can be really difficult if you like get out of rhythm, but the mix-up the boss has is you're supposed to be looking at the monitors, and fortunately, I'm guessing Gazel realizes that if there's few thingies at the start, it means it's the circle AoEs. If there's many, it's the line AoEs. But I would recommend tipping the camera, just a little bit up, so we could see that it was actually the line AoE. This doesn't work anymore the next time the boss does this. Because, and oh, that's smart. Nice job, Gazel. Gazel goes over in Narnia to stand on a platform. Sends their pet over here. And because your pet has like a ludicrously long range and embrace, it might not be needed. But now you're absolutely sure that if you click Whispering Dawn, the people over there gets healing, and if you click Indomitability, the people over here gets healing. Like, you are in both places. Like, that is very good use of the Scholar toolkit. Just want to mention that. Very nice. But yeah, the scary one with this particular boss is, I don't know if it'll actually make it with that, but the scary thing is when it starts mixing up the monitor stuff. I'll see if it does it. If it doesn't, I'll try and go back and explain it, because maybe that's what's been getting Cole. Also, hey Cole, hope you're doing well. Right, so here it is. Don't know if it'll resolve. Or is it this? Nope, it isn't even this. And it's not happening. It's not going to make it. So let me just rewind this really quickly. So this time, when it places the monitors. So the 3 previous times in this encounter when it has placed the monitors, each monitor has a beam directly down to the pod in front of the monitor, which means that the pod in front of the monitor is doing the thing. So you look at this monitor, and that means this pod is doing a line AoE. The 4th time, the monitors actually reach across, like down across, and grab a pod on the side. I don't remember if it's always the same direction, but they always grab like one to the side. So like all of them are like displaced one, which makes it very easy to get it wrong, because they just shift it once, and that's often what get people. But here's the thing, boss dead. Yukarian says, I still have yet to learn Scholar, but that's literally something I've never thought. Placing fairy like that. How do I reposition the fairy anyway? You have your actions. You have your actions. Pet actions. Place. And when you're done having them stand over there, you click heal and it comes back to you. Weirdly, clicking heal doesn't make it heal you, it just comes to you. That's the E. You just place. The interesting thing is that because that's not actually an action, you can actually micromanage your pet while you're casting. So that's usually what I do, is that every time I'm casting something, I'll be like, well, maybe I should move my pet over there. Maybe over there. It's not as needed anymore because Embrace has a 30 yalm range. It's absolutely ludicrous, but it is still relevant because Whispering Dawn, only Whispering Dawn for some reason has a 15 yalm range. Only Whispering Dawn and Angel's Whisper. Fey Blessing has a 20, but it's 15 and 20. Everything else is 30. But for that reason, you might want to like position your pet like so it's centered for your party. So like repositioning. But yeah, it's really difficult to reposition, as VX says. It's really difficult to do this on a controller, I could imagine. Can only do your best. But yeah, like moving your pet around, because it's so free, because it doesn't cost an action or an OGCD or anything, there's no reason to not do it. Yeah, I don't know how you could have used your resources more efficiently here in this fight, Gazel. I feel like you did pretty fine. Kind of the problem, and I think it's very common to see this in, like, if you do a dungeon and your tank knows exactly what to do and your DPS knows exactly what to do and you know exactly what to do, and you end up not needing to use all of your resources. You just see, oh, now I have a full fairy gauge and all of my cooldowns are ready, and I have 3 ether flow and my ether flow cooldown is ready, and I have nothing to use it on. But yeah, any place where you're like, put down Sacred Soil, because usually from what I can see, Gazel, you're going Sacred Soil expecting a raid wide. Every time you do that, you can add Indomitability after the damage lands to like pull people back up more quickly. When there's a big massive raid wide, like we saw on the three plane bosses, you can use it after the massive AoEs there. The thing is, with Indomitability, and Shiro kind of alluded to this, Indomitability is weaker than Sacred Soil and costs the same. So typically, the reason why you use Indomitability is because it's faster than Sacred Soil, because it heals like this. But the helpfulness of Indomitability also boils down to how much healing your co-healer's doing. So if your co-healer is also a scholar, or maybe a sage, they will use Ixocholi, right? Maybe it's an astrologian, they might be less inclined to use their AoE healing, because they don't have Afflatus Rapture on speed dial. But because of this, you don't see very many opportunities to use it. But basically, every time you use Sacred Soil, that just follows with an opportunity to use Indomitability after the damage lands, if you need to be topped up for the follow-up. Gold says these hallways are insane. I'm not sure if this is even possible on Black Mage. It is, but I don't think you can keep a rotation going like that. It is going to be hard, and you might have to get really creative with your rotation. Yeah, I don't think there's very much to add on your use of cooldowns. I just think that you had the impression that you weren't doing anything, because every time your party took damage, your white mage was like, I got it. And you just get to sit there, like, guess I'll use Sacred Soil again. See, here, you could use Aether Pact, however, why would you? You could use Aether Pact, you could also use Indomitability here, you could use Recitation Indomitability here. Used Excogitation, that's also good. What was the white mage casting? You see, that one... let's see if I can find it. So right here, you use Excogitation on one of them. If it was me in this position, I think I would also probably recommend using Excogitation on one of them as you did. You could even use Recitation Excogitation because it's right there. And that would probably just top them up. But sometimes that can be unlucky if your co-healer happens to use, you know, a Flatus Solace in the same moment and they get a crit. Then this DPS player has a Recitation Excogitation and they're at full health. So it'll never pop. But you could do that. This might really get them up in safe areas. And then you could use, for example, Lustrate on the other Reaper and then give them Ether Pact. Why Lustrate and Ether Pact? Because this amount of HP is dangerous. So you want to get them more than this. But you don't need to just, you know, go kitchen sink on them and just give them everything. You can just get them to a safe range and then Ether Pact. And then, you know, that's, you have Fairy Gauge, so you could do that. But this is a lot easier for me to say in retrospect, because all other healing that I've said, you could do this, your co-healer's just been like, nope, get out of the way, I've got this. But in this particular case, you could go Recitation Excog on this guy, and then just Lustrate Ether Pact on this guy. And Shiro says, it's probably apparent to most already, decide that you're going to use Recitation ahead of time and use it early so you maintain clean OGCD weaves. That is also true. That's actually a really good point. Recitation lasts 15 seconds. But it isn't spent unless you use Adloquium, Succor, Indomitability, or Excogitation. Which means that you can do this. And now I needed Indomitability. And then the cooldown was already started. It not only does it lead to you having lead to you not having to like go Recitation Excog, that's a double weave. Because you already used Recitation beforehand. But it also means that Recitation goes on cooldown a little earlier. It's the thing is, in this particular case, when we're talking about Recitation Excogitation, how would you know that these two Reapers were going to get hit beforehand? Like, if you assumed everyone got hit, which would be a more likely scenario, right? Then you would do Recitation Indomitability. So, like, that's the thing. Sometimes if you have to react quickly, it might be difficult to have, you know, clean double weaves, or single weaves for that matter. So sometimes your rotation, like, the thing is, because this is casual content, it is okay if you lose a little bit of damage in the aim to play safely. So, like, that's why I said you could do Recitation, Excog, Ether Pact, and Lustrate. Like, that's a quadruple weave. You can't do that smoothly. You can't. But if you space them over several weaves, then the Reapers you're trying to help might be dead, or the White Mage have already done something about it. So that's why it has to like be, if you're going to do something about it, it has to be now. Otherwise, the White Mage will go, I'll use my resources again, I guess. I'm kind of running low here, running on fumes. I guess I'll use Benediction on one and Tetra on the other one. And now they're dry. So it can be difficult. But Shiro's absolutely right that planning ahead is usually a really good idea. Like that's both for tanks and healers. If you're trying to optimize content, planning what cooldowns you're going to use for what is one of the most effective ways to be more efficient. And here would also be an okay time to go. You have Dissipation up, so not Fey Blessing. You could use Recitation Indom. Like, that would be one option. You could also put down Sacred Soil, but the thing is, this arena is really big. You can't be sure the 3 people that actually needs the healing will stay. That's part of the reason why I would lean more on Recitation Indom for them. And the reason why, just to be clear, because now it might feel like I'm going, well, if 2 people, then this, and then if 3 people, something completely different. The reason why I said use Recitation Excog on one and then Lustrate Ether Pact on the other when there was 2 people in grave danger is because 2 players needing healing is like too few for AoE healing to win, like to be better typically. If you use Indomitability, that heals for, let me see here, the same as Excog. But if you use Excogitation, if you use Indom, they both would still need more healing if there's only 2. So you'd have to use single target healing on both of them anyway. But now that there's 3 targets, they're not in grave danger, but they could use the healing. You can't use your pet actions right now because Dissipation, but you could use Indom or even Recitation Indom, and the primary reason why I would suggest using Recitation Indom and not just Indom is because and this is probably obvious, right, if you're a Scholar main, the Recitation Indom is like, it's like a free ether flow to use, but it has like this little asterisk of saying healing only. You can't use it on energy drain, but these 3 you can use on energy drain, and you just ate your fairy to have them, and you might want to use them on energy drain. So the most, I would say, cost-effective way to deal with this problem is to go Recitation Indom, because then you don't lose potential energy drains. There's the possibility that you'll have to use these ether flows on energy drain, on more healing afterwards, but this is a start. So that's my suggestion. It does seem like I think the White Mage used Rapture there, and if they had done it a single second later, the Dragoon would have died. And there was the Benediction. And there's a donut AoE. That was incredible timing. So, anyone that has trouble with this mechanic, there's this spark that floats from the boss out to the real spot. This doesn't happen on the other one. It might be obvious once you've seen it, but there's a lot of people that have trouble with this. Like, the Chosen 3. The Maimers. Not to be confused with the Memers. They're actually trying their best. They weren't the only ones, it looks like. Right. You actually... Wait. You're setting up a deployment. That's pretty good. It looks like the White Mage dealt with healing up the 3 while you were setting up your deployment. And you also set it up on Sip. That's pretty good. Unfortunately, it looks like Sip isn't main tanking, so he might not take that much damage unless there's a tank buster. I think we've reached the point where the White Mage have gotten like resources again, so now like we're back to what can you do? Doesn't matter, the White Mage is going to do it for you. It's quite funny how that turns out. Broil spam. What can you do? I can do damage. I'm a green DPS. Oh, and there's the sparks again. Works the same way. Oh, Sip says this issue with that fight was that the start the tanks kept fighting for aggro. I'm not saying that you were doing anything wrong by not main tanking. I was more saying that setting up your deployment tactic on your tank is usually the correct option, because only the tank is going to take like outside of unexpected things, only the tank is going to take more damage than everyone else because the boss, is wailing on the tank or tank busters and all that. But in an alliance raid, sometimes it's not even your tank who's tanking, and then there's nothing you can do. That's fair, Sip. I imagine if the other tanks stopped tanking, you would just taunt. VX says, speaking of memes, are there any memes related to wiping? Yes, the floor tank, I'm pretty sure, originates from the naval heart. You might be wondering why, and the answer to that is if you use elusive jump in the Titan arena, you die. Like, if you're in the middle and facing outward with your elusive jump, you die. And landslide itself is also a meme. But that's how the Dragoon become the floor tank. So there, of course there is. Ah, nice. Nicely deducted. Some people weren't fast enough. Was that? Here comes the limit break. Yoink? I don't know if that landed. Anyway, what I want to highlight here is I think overall, Gazel, you did fine. You did fine. Minor things that I could suggest was like, as Shiro also said, you could use your recitation more aggressively, like beforehand, for example. You could do that. I suggested sometimes where you could go, well, you could do this to heal that guy and this to use to heal that guy. Something that I want to highlight in regards to Scholar is that on the one hand, I'm not saying that there's a wrong or a right answer to this. There isn't always a right answer to this. This is again related to the, in hindsight, it's easy to know. There was that point where it's like 3 people needed healing. I look at your situation and say, oh, you don't have a pet because dissipation was used 6 seconds ago. Like, you couldn't possibly have known you needed Fey Blessing in that very moment. Because in retrospect, you should have known, I guess. Can't know that. Because the 3 players took damage from an avoidable mechanic. And this is something to keep in mind. If you're in a boss fight and you're feeling like, I could have done something better, you're like watching the clip back and thinking, I could have done better by doing something different here. If the thing you had to do different relied on you knowing that that and that and that guy got hit by an avoidable mechanic, then like you couldn't have done it better in the moment. With the information you had, you couldn't have done it any different. If you need, like, the only way you could have done it different was to like play in a more conservative way. Like, for example, maybe someone will get hit by this mechanic, so I will wait with using dissipation in case I need to use Fey Blessing. But you can do that forever, right? Your rather aggressive use of dissipation, I think, was the right call, because throughout this entire alliance raid, I noticed every time there was something you could use your resources on, the white mage was there. Just nope, and it just pushed you, like they just pushed you in the face, like nope, I'll do it. I'll use my lilies or something. So you just didn't have to do anything. So using dissipation to push for more damage was ultimately probably the right call. So I just want to mention that in retrospect, or in the moment at the very least, dissipation on cooldown was a good idea. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because, and I think I've talked about this a little bit on Discord as well, if you're not using any healing spells in the duration of dissipation, then the value proposition of dissipation is that you lose 10 casts of embrace And for 30 seconds, you lose access to Whispering Dawn, Fey Illumination, and Fey Blessing. And Ether Pact. And also your Ether Flow doesn't generate Fairy Gauge, assuming that matters. Like, those things. And you get 3 Ether Flow. At minimum sale value, an Ether Flow is worth 1 Lustrate, which is 600 cure potency, and assuming you need to use these during Dissipation, then they're not worth Fairy Gauge, which means they are worth that using Dissipation defensively, without using any spell healing, is worth 1800 cure potency. The reason why that is a problem, in quotations, is because Embrace... So because of pet potencies, it's not... 10 Embraces are not worth 1800 potency. They're closer to 1500 potency, something like that, give or take. And in the near range, you don't have this. So it's probably closer to 1300 or 1200 even. But if you're basically trading access to all of this for a net gain of around 600 cure potency, assuming you use it. Which means that Dissipation, unless you're using a healing spell during Dissipation to get great value out of the healing, it can be argued that Dissipation might be a net loss of value depending on what you need them for. And the reason why I say there's not really a right or a wrong answer is because if you actually write out the value of Dissipation, it is always beneficial to use Dissipation on cooldown. The problem is that Dissipation locks you out of a decent amount of defensive cooldowns for 30 seconds and limits you to certain other cooldowns for 30 seconds, you could say. Which isn't always a good thing, especially if you're playing in more casual content where you can't be sure that your group knows what they're doing. Which means that sometimes you'll have 1, 2, or 3 players that repeatedly take unnecessary damage. So it's hard. That's why I'm saying you did the right call. You did the right call in using Dissipation, but generally, I think it's better to use Dissipation for an offensive reason than a defensive reason, because Dissipation is either worth, a gain of around 300 to 600 cure potency, and the reason why I'm only looking at Lustrate for this is because you know that you could use Lustrate. Indomitability, Sacred Soil, Excogitation, these buttons might be on cooldown for the entirety of Dissipation. And that's why I'm saying, Gazel, you said I should ignore Dissipation's cooldown unless I know it is absolutely safe. It's difficult. Let me put it like this. If you're going to use Dissipation, the question is why you're using it. If you're using it on cooldown because it has a cooldown, then it is about optimization, right? You're trying to maximize your damage. And that is a reasonable argument. The defensive value of Dissipation is like a kiss-curse thing. As I said, you lose 10 embraces by using Dissipation. The instant you click Dissipation, 1500 potency out the window. So unless you can make the most of those 3 lustrates you're getting, or the 3 ether flows if you choose to use it on something else, then you're probably losing value. There's also the part that if you are using those 3 ether flows on something else, and this is something that I have talked about in my healer guides, is that, for example, Sucker can beat at Locurium and on 2 to 3 targets already in raw healing potency, but only if it actually, generates value. At Locurium heals for less than Physic. just keep that in mind. If you use I'm going to say Adlocurium. I'm used to saying that. If you use that on someone and it crits, awesome, and then they take 0 damage for 30 seconds, then a crit physic would have healed for more. That's an example. So if you use, say, the 3 ether flows from Dissipation on Lustrate and top up 3 players, and they individually only needed like 300, 400, and 500 cure potency to get topped up, so there's a significant overhealing, then you're not getting your full money's worth out of that Dissipation. Whereas Embrace would have, sprinkled it out to whoever needed it. Not necessarily gotten the full value every time, but Embrace typically prioritizes someone who needs healing more, so it usually gets the most possible value on every cast. So my point is, if you're using Dissipation for a defensive reason, just keep in mind that the aftershock of using Dissipation is that you're now the healer and not the pet. If you have a co-healer, less of a problem, which is why you can more safely get away with using Dissipation. If you're using Dissipation for an offensive reason, then that of course means that you have evaluated that you don't need to heal. The thing that makes it difficult to answer, Gazel, is you're saying, should I only use Dissipation if it is absolutely safe? Well, you said, should I ignore Dissipation's cooldown unless I know it is absolutely safe? If you measure that you probably won't need to use your ether flow defensively, then you can probably use Dissipation. The key thing to keep in mind in this context is, if using Dissipation leads to you having to use Succor, then but then you get 3 energy drains. You've gained 5 potency if you only had to cast 1 GCD heal. Like, it's really complicated. My point is, if you're using Dissipation for offense, just keep in mind that the amount of potency you're getting from those 3 energy drains is like 1 GCD. 1. So that 3-minute cooldown isn't crucially important to use on cooldown. It's more important to use it safely. But if you are optimizing, then, like, in a Savage Raid context, you would probably want to try to use Dissipation on cooldown, because it is 300 potency left on the table if you can have it, right? This is also why in the Scholar opener sometimes you will see people use Dissipation first and then Ether Flow, because then you don't have a pet for the first 30 seconds of the fight, but then you have for the following 2.5 minutes. And because it's a little silly, because the value proposition I was talking about, this Ether Flow is also worth 300 potency and damage just as well as this Ether Flow is. The only reason why we're not saying that, oh, well, you only get 3 loss rates worth with this one, is because these didn't cost you anything. In fact, you were handed free MP for using it. See, Gazel says, I believe I was approaching Dissipation as a more energy drain button when nothing is happening tool. Great. But it had become brain dead damage button recently. Well, I would recommend viewing Dissipation mainly as free energy drain button. The safest times to use Dissipation, the safest times, is if you don't need to heal anyone the next 30 seconds. Or if the pack you're currently fighting is about to die. Which means, for example, if you're about to, if you're in a dungeon, the pack you're fighting is just about to die, you click Dissipation, and before the tank has reached the next pack, your pet is back. A slight exaggeration, but yeah. The reason why it's difficult to talk about Dissipation is because defensively, it's like a kiss curse thing. It helps you in the immediate moment by giving you 3 ether flow, which you might need, but then you don't have a pet for 30 seconds, which locks you out of other cooldowns, including Seraph. But if you're viewing it as an offensive tool, then you're sacrificing healing that you might not need. Like, if everyone's topped up in the next 30 seconds, then you threw your pet into the stratosphere because they aren't helpful for the next 30 seconds. Which is fine. But it is complicated to talk about dissipation, specifically because it is such a, as Shiro says, it's a sacrifice to use. The reason why I focused on it is simply because it's hard to use, Gazel. I'm not saying you used it wrong. As I said, I pointed out, you couldn't use Fey Blessing in this specific instance because you just used Dissipation. But everything in that Alliance Raid run, told me that if I was in your shoes, I would have at some point came to the conclusion that I don't need to do anything because the other healers got it covered. I'll just, like, pick up the slack when I need to. I can use Dissipation on cooldown. I think I have footage of like, I believe in my high-level Scholar guide, I have raid footage from P5. I remember that specific run, I used Dissipation on cooldown because my co-healer was using spells to heal all the time. Like, they were doing 100% of the healing, so I was just like, well, then I'll just be a DPS then. So it's like, you can do a lot of things different, and it depends also on how your co-healer's playing. But I do think that a good tip, just for your own peace of mind, is to say you don't have to use Dissipation on cooldown. Not exactly on cooldown, because it has a 3-minute long cooldown. If a boss fight is like 5 minutes in like an alliance raid or something, then you get 1 or 2 dissipations in that fight. And that's almost regardless of whether you use it on cooldown or you wait a bit. This is also something to keep in mind. Like, if you're looking at longer cooldowns in your toolkit, the longer their cooldowns are, the more you can get away with, like, not clicking them immediately and things like that, because you won't lose as many uses. Of course, when playing perfectly optimally, you're typically using anything that gives damage on cooldown. So it's more complicated than that. The recitation Indomitability might be really good. I think, and this is also something that Shiro did bring up earlier, that often you will probably want to use Indomitability specifically with recitation. I think what really leads to that conclusion isn't necessarily because Indomitability is weak without recitation, but more so because you can't use recitation on Sacred Soil. Like, if you could, you probably would. But by using recitation Indomitability, you just have like a free heal, freeing up more ether flow to use on energy drain. So as you say, it would give you more breathing room for safe dissipation. Absolutely. Yeah, this is also something that I notice myself in like raids, trials, alliance raids, is as Scholar, you have less reasons to use recitation. Like, you absolutely have less reasons to use recitation. Whereas in a dungeon, I will typically just, I'll just use recitation ACECOG on the tank on cooldown. Could you imagine the absolute bananas potency of recitation crit Sacred Soil? Well, let's see. How much would that be? let's assume that you have the big, massive, like maximum, like let's say you have, let's see, I think 62% crit damage or crit power sounds reasonable, right? So 600 potency. You know, clean, just shy of 1000 potency. Just blep, place that down real quick. Very balanced. Absolutely balanced, am I right? I don't actually know if you'd want that though. This actually leads back to something I've been like thinking about with Sage. Something that some players highlight with Sage that makes it absolutely insane in terms of like healing over time is that if you use both Fizzes and Caracoli, like even better if you also add Crosses, if you have those three combined, just the Fizzes and Caracoli, that's 230 cure potency per 3 seconds. Then you remember that if you put Crosses on the tank, that's 20% more, and Fizzes is 10% more. And that is around 1500 cure potency over 15 seconds. Like, that's 100 cure potency per second, and then you're also Sage with your Cardia, right? Like, the reason why, and you might see this in, yes, as Gadol says, this seems quite overkill. If you check my Sage guides, you check my, like, how to do a dungeon pull with Sage short, I typically completely separate Fizzes and Caracoli at level 90 because they're both so insanely strong that your tank probably don't need both, even though they're insanely strong. Like, even though they're insanely strong if you combine them because they stack in the way that they do, you don't need that much power. Like, you don't need all that. You don't need it. So it's just better to not go full blast on both just because they stack. Like, I usually do one after the other. I think part of the argument for why people sometimes stack them is because they believe the fight is already over by the time they run out, and I don't feel like that is always true. And it's only true if you used it on a tank in a DPS in a group that didn't need it. Anyway, that's a little bit of a sidetrack, but yeah, healing. I hope you did get something out of it, Gazel, but I do want to say that ultimately I think you did fine. The things that went wrong was mostly like mess-ups with mechanics, and then I would like to reiterate the thing about if you mess up and you die in a fight, you can talk about and apologize while you're waiting for the rest. When you have been raised, then just they know. They know. Trust me on that. You don't have to thank them for them rescuing you. You don't have to thank them for the rest. Obviously, they would rescue, and I'm sure they know you're thankful. It's a given. Like, maybe I'm assuming too much from people. I used to tank in, like, a raiding guild in WoW. Where, like, normally when I'm a tank in a raiding guild or something, or, like, in any context, the thing is, often what the tanks need to do can often be completely disconnected from what everyone else has to do. So it can often be confusing for the rest of the group if you're like communicating boss mechanics between the tanks in the, you know, the voice chat, for example. So often tank communication can end up being something like a tell or like a message in the chat to tell your co-tank to do a thing. Or otherwise it can be completely wordless because you know. You both know. You don't have to say it. if I don't get a 3-page essay on how thankful you are, I'm not resurrecting you anymore. Gazel says, when I first heard that, heard what? Sorry. I thought of like using Sacred Soil with Whispering Dawn. I'm so confused. Yeah, oh right, yeah, that would be sort of similar, wouldn't it? And exactly, actually now I realize what you're saying, guys. I think a Sage player goes, if you stack Fizzes and Karakuri, you get like this crazy healing burst. If you add Crassus on top, it's even more insane. And as a scholar, you're sitting there like, but question, why would I combine Protraction and Sacred Soil and Whispering Dawn? Surely one of the heal over time effects is plenty, right? And the reason why Sage gets weird like that is because Fizzes has this increases HP recovered by healing actions by 10% detail right there at the bottom. And that's why people are like, I should make use of that. There's a different story if you're like using Fizzes and then Ixoholy because you need to do a big burst of healing. But that's not the same. Yeah, one thing you can also do if you really want to thank people for resing you is make sure to say thank you before you can have control of your character again. I'm going to say, you see the res, right? Thank you, real quick, like GY, and then click accept. Or you can click accept and then write it as, you know, screen fades to black and that. Does the 10% apply to Fizzes itself? Good question. Does anyone know? No, that's not a test I'm asking. I'm genuinely asking because I don't actually know. Let's see. How would we test that? How would we test that? The big problem is that it's just 10%. So so the thing is, if it does work on itself, it should heal for 40% more than Karakoli. And if it doesn't, it should heal for 30% more. The question is, how much does Karakoli heal for? 2-9. That's a crit. That's also a crit. 2-9-ish. 2-9. See. Okay, so if Fizzes is affected by its own HP healing increase, then its average healing should be over 4,000 for me specifically. The regular ticks. If it isn't, then it should be decidedly under 4,000. And this is, of course, we have to keep in mind there's variance, like heal variance. It's a little bit random. But it should be like 3.8 thousand if it doesn't work, and more than 4,000 if it does work. Right? So with that in mind, $3,900. $3,900. Close to 4,000. It's very close to 4,000. And then it dropped really high, really low. Okay, so my estimate is option 1 is that I'm pretty sure it doesn't. The reason for that is because the last tick would have been an extremely low roll if it did work. But all the other ticks were really high rolls because it was like in the area where it could have been a low roll if it worked and a high roll if it didn't. And then the last tick was like, it would have been an insanely low roll. I'll try again. That's a crit. And that's a crit. 386? 38. It doesn't work. It doesn't stack on itself. It doesn't work with itself. Unfortunately. That is both good news and bad news. The good news are that... well, it's mainly bad news. It means that you don't get the value out of the healing bonus if you don't cast any other healing during it. Just have 2 sages. Oh yeah. If one sage uses fizzes and then the other uses fizzes, they would work. They would work. But why would you do that? Why would you? Let's see, it adds up to 650 potency. Whispering Dawn adds up to 560 potency. Like a tick too low. The reason why we're comparing fizzes with Whispering Dawn is specifically because they're basically supposed to be the same action, you know, the memes. This is Lustrate and all that. That's why we're comparing them. But yeah, it does seem like Fizzes has like slightly more oomph to it because it also is Fey Illumination. Like it's both Fey Illumination, kind of, while simultaneously being Whispering Dawn. Shiro says, Fey Illumination buffs healing magic specifically, which, correct me if I'm wrong, means it won't affect that many stacking hots we're talking about using. Correct. Fey Illumination only affects spells. So that's like, it's a really weird backwards synergy for Scholar, because it means that often a white mage will get more value out of Fey Illumination than a Scholar will. Merfolk says, do healing potency buffs suffer from diminishing returns as the defensive buffs do? How? How do you mean? Sure said tank communication really is like, provoke you, redacted. That's not entirely wrong. I have actually had that exact conversation, although there was a taunt multiple times with a code tank. I think this sounds like an excellent time to bring out the paint again. Oh, I know, Shiro. I wanted to know what Merfolk meant. How they would be diminishing. So, the way that diminishing returns work is actually not like a mechanic in the game. It's an effect of math. So if I say for example I'm a Dragoon and I use Lance Charge and Dragon Sight, then it makes me get 10% more damage, and then 10% more damage. Don't worry, I'll get back. I'll make it make sense. Which means that you actually do 21% more damage, as opposed to 100 and so just 20% more damage, right? So this is things stacking multiplicatively, multiplicative stacking as opposed to additive stacking, right? So it means A times B as opposed to A plus B. This is what gives rise to diminishing returns. If a tank, so let's say I'm a warrior and I use Rampart and Vengeance. Then I make the damage I'm taking get reduced to 80%. That's Rampart. And then I reduce it to 70%. That's Vengeance. Yeah, exactly. You're already getting it, Merfolk, I think. So when they're stacked together, it leads to 56%. Which, notably, is more than 50%. And that's diminishing returns. Hey Bits, hope you're doing well. Which of course means that if you are you know what, let's say you're a sage and you use Fizzes, that's 10%, and Crosses, that's 20%, then the answer is, of course, and I'm guessing you already know the answer, Merfolk, that you get 110% healing done times 120%. Which is, of course, leading to... Whoops, that is wrong. 32% more healing rather than 130%. And there is no diminishing returns in this. It's simply everything stacks multiplicatively. As a result, you get diminishing returns on your investment. Like the diminishing returns is it sounds like a mechanic of its own, but it's more like something that is like that comes about as an effect of other things. The saying of diminishing returns in this case is, of course, you invest your cooldown and your returns are diminished because you stacked them. But that's because of the reducing effect of defensive cooldowns as opposed to the increasing effect of offensive, or in this case, weirdly, healing cooldowns. But it is consistent, and that's ultimately what matters. You wouldn't also want to overstack healing potency because it leads to overheal as well, right? Probably. I would say it depends, right? I don't know when you would want to stack like this, but it depends on the specific situation you're in. Like, if your tank needs an unreasonably large amount of healing, it might be good to stack. And if people... if like you're in a savage encounter and you need an insane amount of healing, you might want to stack them, but maybe you'll do it differently. So generally, you could say stacking healing cooldowns leads to overhealing if you use too many, right? That is more what this is about. Than than in like the boosts that you get. It's mostly about how much healing do you need and how much healing do you use. That's why, as I said, I wouldn't use Physis and Kirakori together in most cases, because it's excessive. Also true bits. People lie with numbers a lot. Female says, I still don't understand how parry and blocking works. What does it translate to in terms of mitigation? Just taking a note, I actually have the exact way blocks and parries work at this early in my high level Paladin guide, because it's relevant for Paladins with Bulwark. Right, so I think the exact question BMO had, Bits, wasn't exactly that. So blocks, the way blocking works is that depending on how much block strength and block rating you have, as opposed to the attacking target, the amount of block chance you have and how much damage you block changes. But if you have a shield that matches your level, like if you have a level 90 shield and it is high quality, or it's a drop from some from a dungeon or whatever, they will all have the same block strength and block rating. And if you have an appropriately leveled shield for what you're doing, then you will always have a 30% chance to take 20% less damage. Now, the key thing that is important about blocking is that blocking can block any damage except a dot. And if the attack that applies a dot to you is blocked, that has no impact on the dot itself. It will still do full damage. This is important in relation to snapshotting, because if you have Rampart up and you get a dot applied to you, that will make the dot do 20% less damage. But blocking the attack that applied the dot will not. Parrying is something that basically all jobs can do, and you have a 10% chance to parry, but only physical attacks. Only physical attacks can be parried, but they will do 15% less damage when you do that. The key thing to remember here is that you can't parry and block the same attack. As Shiro says, you also cannot block a crit. What this means, I don't think we know the exact hit table of Final Fantasy XIV, but I can use the knowledge I have from World of Warcraft. The way it works there is that your chance to be hit is basically, if we take a even leveled mob, like a level equal to yours, then you take 100% minus crit chance, minus block chance, minus parry chance, minus, in World of Warcraft, dodge chance, And whatever's left is hit chance. Like, if you aren't getting crit, you're not blocking the attack, you're not parrying the attack, and you're certainly not dodging it, then you're hit. But because we know that you can't be you can't crit and block and parry anyone in any you can't combine them, we know that the chance to get hit is whatever remains. Now, let me just rewind these so I don't lose my percentages in the top right. So, what this means, hypothetically, is that... Well, let's start with the crit thing Shiro mentioned. Mobs from before Stormblood, I believe it's even before level 70, can crit with auto attacks. But I think it's only bosses or something like that. It's limited. And sometimes it's like boss specific. An example of this is Shiva Extreme at level 50. When she has her bow out, she has a 100% chance to crit. All of her auto attacks will crit you. Which means that Bulwark would do nothing assuming you had access to it. You don't, but hey. And you can't block or parry her attacks at all because of that. But what this does mean is, how do they translate in raw mitigation? Is if you have a 30% chance to reduce damage by 20%, so you have a 30% chance to make the damage you're taking 80%. Then that means, of course, well, this is nonsense, actually. It makes more sense to write it as 20%, because that's what you're reducing it by. Let me actually just fix that. This. You have a 30% chance to reduce damage by 20%. Then that leads to, what's 30% of 20%? It's 6%. A passive 6% damage reduction, assuming that you reduce all attacks. Like, that this is evenly happening for everything. It's an average 6% damage reduction. The 10% parry is, of course, just 10% times 15%. Which leads to a 1.5% average damage reduction. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Shiro. Before Bulwark was... So originally Bulwark increased your block chance by 60%. Then they removed it, and then they reinvented it and made it all attacks block. When it was made into old Sheltron, essentially, you could say. But there was an even older Sheltron. But I think I know what you mean. What you meant is, exactly, Sheltron used to guarantee blocking, which was a problem because of the dot thing, for example. But so, all of these numbers, what they mean is that a Paladin has somewhere around, you know, these two numbers combined of damage reduction passively. Like, they just take 7.5% less damage than than all the other tanks, you could say. Now, that isn't entirely true, because all the other tanks have the parry chance as well, and this only applies to physical attacks, so it isn't entirely accurate, right? But where this actually comes up as being relevant is when you use Bulwark. What is Bulwark actually worth? Because Bulwark makes this... so what we have on a level 90 mob fighting a Paladin is it has a 30% chance to do 80% damage, a 10% chance to do 85% damage, and a 60% chance to do 100% damage. And when you use Bulwark, you replace all that with a 100% chance to do 80% damage. So what does that equate to? Like how does that add together, right? So, all of this, as I said, adds together to a 7.5% damage reduction. That's what it adds up to together. This, you might be shocked to find, but this actually adds together for a 20% damage reduction. I know, mind-blowing stuff here, like complete insanity on the Caetsu Chaiji channel here, complete insanity. But what actually matters is how much, like, when you go from 7.5% to 20%, that doesn't mean that you're now, like, that isn't a direct translation of like damage reduction. Exactly. Like, what is interesting here is how much better this is, right? And I'm having a little bit of trouble mathing it in my head. So this isn't going to mean that you're taking 12.5% less damage, as Bits quickly pointed out. This isn't going to mean that you're taking 12.5% less damage, because you're already taking 7.5% less damage and you're going to 20%. So how does this change? This is actually the exact same story as, in a way, it's the same story as when you stack defensive cooldowns. You add Rampart and then you add Vengeance. It's just like you add them on top of each other. But in this case, we're actually talking about what's the difference. If you're already taking 92.5% damage, if you're already taking 92.5% damage and you then change it to 80%, then the difference is what really matters here, right? And as far as I can see, just at a quick estimate, is that right? It seems wrong to me. Just a moment. I'll have it in just a moment. Right. It's just me being dumb. going from 7.5% damage reduction to 20% of course doesn't mean that you're now taking 20% less damage. It also doesn't mean you're taking 12.5% less damage. You are, and the 0.5 is actually important here. You are taking, sorry, this is getting a little hectic here. You're taking 13.5% less damage when you use Bulwark. Around 13.5% less damage. Compared to what you would have been taking otherwise. Very, very weird that it works like this. But the point is, and what matters here, is that Bulwark isn't actually, like, it's actually really weak when you think about it. What Bulwark does, when we're talking block, is it guarantees that you're going to block the next attack. That's what it's about. It's not about your average damage reduction, which is this number. The additional, like, more damage reduction you're getting. What matters, 13.5% as a defensive cooldown isn't that impressive. Indeed, arm's length is around 16.6%. Rampart is of course 20%. Reprisal is 10%. Like 13.5% is okay, but it's not 20%. That's what matters. But the reason why that matters is because the reason you're using Bulwark in a boss fight is because you look at the situation and go, I would really like to block this next attack the boss is doing. You're not thinking, I need a 20% damage reduction effect right now. You're just thinking, if I could block anything this fight throws at me, this would be the one that I would choose. Like, it's basically Sheltron that you're using it as. In a trash pack, it's a completely different story, because there you're actually looking at these 13.5% and saying, I mean, it's better than 0. That is kind of the idea. You're right on that, Bits, but here's the thing. I didn't say you would use Bulwark alone. Murfolk asks to camouflage. Right, so we know that you have 10% chance for 15% damage. Whoops. 15% damage reduction with parry. When you use camouflage, you change it to 60%. That is equal to 9% damage reduction from physical attacks. Specifically. So that, of course, same idea, except it's a lot less impressive numbers we're working with. So you say 98.5%. Nope, that's not how you write it. 91% divided by 98.5%. And then you get 92.4%. Which leads you to 7.6% damage reduction. And then, of course, you also have the 10% from camouflage, and given that those two stack together, you say, let's see, 0.9 times 0.924 minus 1. With camouflage should equate to around 16.84% damage reduction from my quick estimate. However, the important thing you need to keep in mind here is that a significant portion, which is this part, only works on physical attacks. Like, the 6.84% of camouflage here is only for physical attacks. The remaining 10% is for anything, but over a third of the effect only works on physical attacks. Notably physical attacks that can be parried, because there might be attacks that can't be parried. Kind of, Angel. You could say kind of. Teaching you math. But no, the weird thing... The weird thing, Merfolk, with stats in Final Fantasy XIV and buffs is that things that increase a flat number, you could say, multiply it. So, or decrease a flat number. So if I use Sentinel, I reduce the damage of a flat number, meaning the damage that I take, by 30%. So I multiply it. But if I use an action that increases the value of a percentage, so for example a crit chance or a direct hit chance, then it is additive for some reason. Which means that Devilment doesn't just say times 1.2 on your crit rate and your direct hit rate, it just says plus 20. Like just plus 20% on top. Exactly. Flat numbers, multiplicative, percentages, additive. And that of course means that camouflage is actually an excellent example of both things, because it gives you an additive 50% parry rate and a multiplicative 10% damage reduction. And that means that to actually figure out how good camouflage is, you have to first figure out how much damage reduction is 50% parry rate worth. Then you can take that and combine with the existing damage reduction, and then you know how much damage reduction camouflage actually supplies. But isn't it shocking that arm's length, which makes enemies take 20% longer to attack, which is the same as reducing their damage by a sixth, which is 16.66666666666%, is only a tiny bit worse than Gunbreaker's fancy schmancy camouflage cooldown. Isn't that wild? Bit says Final Fantasy XIV, best example of why understanding stats is helpful, even if you don't care much about research. I should show this to my stats classes when I teach that. That would be hilarious. Alright, so watch this guy, he's playing a video game, and here he stops playing the video game for like 40 minutes to talk about math. But it is wild how the stats can matter in Final Fantasy XIV. It is quite interesting that it is pretty often that I run into people that don't quite understand why crit is so good in the game. And the thing is, crit is so good because math, for the same reason, and because of things stacking with each other. You make that window green to use it like a blackboard on stream? What? What do you mean? Oh, that is not a green screen. This program is called Transparent Paint. This is just a window that is transparent. And specifically a program to do this. I specifically downloaded this program to be able to do this on stream. Unfortunately, if I make it as big as my monitor, then it starts lagging real bad. It also starts lagging real bad when I start to add a lot of lines to it, and then it starts to get difficult to draw curved lines. But yeah, it's just a tool to be able to like paint like this. But in retrospect, I could probably have looked for a better background. But yeah, it is just a paint that I can draw on the game, you could say. And sometimes it's helpful if we have something on the screen that I need to like also draw on. It's usually not necessary because we usually just talk about stats. Poor Paladin. I want to have a shield and have protective abilities. Monkey paw curls. You got it! Your unique shield skills are the lowest impact mitigations tanks have, and the community only likes damage anyway. I mean, I hope those two things aren't related. Poor tanks that didn't like to manage enmity. Can I have to not manage enmity like really aggressively? Can I just use my damage stance? Monkey paw curls. Enmity is now irrelevant. Now you need to be now you're DPS in tanks clothing. And then you cry. Thank you, Murphy. I usually take the clips that were posted before the stream so that I don't like just grab a clip that I'm not entirely prepared for. That has previously led to me not really giving a clip the proper time it's worth. Speaking of clip, I don't know if Cole is still here or if they fell asleep. If they are still here, we haven't watched that clip yet. The really quick one, I believe. But otherwise, we'll just take it next time. And that is also true, Shiro says, it's not uncommon for raid leaders to pull up a screen capture of the minimap to help work through resolving mechanics. I mean, I've had, like, raid situations where you just, like, go, okay, so here's the arena, and then you just draw a square, or, like, a circle, and you go, and then the mechanic, and then this stuff happens here and here, and you just draw the things. You don't even need a screenshot of the arena, you just, or the minimap, you just draw the arena, because rarely is the arena something really creative like P10. It's usually just a square or a circle. And as you know, if you're doing your MSQ and suddenly something happens, you land in a room with a square arena in it, you're like, oh, this is where the trial is happening, isn't it? The triangle. If I remember correctly, P10 has like... Isn't P10's arena like you have the square, and then you have this weird danger zone, and this weird danger zone, and then you have this part here, and this part here, and then you have the random boss icon. This is not how P10 looks. Boy, this inconspicuous circle platform surely will never contain a boss fight, right? Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, living tree, a P7. That is a... Is that? I'm pretty sure it's like a circle that then turns into... into something like this, right? Sure, that's the arena. She looks more like a kid's drawing of the boss. Right, and here's his boxing glove. And here's his other boxing glove. And then, of course, he needs like some legs. Let's see. Like a shoe and a shoe. There you go. This is P10, right? Bikote is the boss in P10. What a masterpiece. P10P ain't new duty. It says seriously though, where's the primal that is a chalk drawing that all the local kids played to for weeks to get out of their chores? Prayed to for weeks to get out of their chores. Could you imagine? I think it's a good thing you need to shower them in crystals and gorge them on ether. You can't be leaking the special trial releasing before Dawntrail. It's really funny, Tristan. Yeah, I think we've reached the it's the bit to the side, the knockout bell. Gorge them on ether. Welcome back, Emil. We were talking about funny shaped arenas, and I drew the P10 arena, but this is now the secret boss that we will never see, I guess. And he has a shirt, you know, with like a quote on it, and he has pants and shoes and boxing gloves. Anyway, I think we have reached the end of this stream. So if you did enjoy the wonderful people that you saw on the stream in the chat, remember that there's a Discord community server that you can join, where you will hopefully find a bunch of these people in the chat. You will also find me. You'll also find the weekly schedule where you can see what else is coming up this week. You will usually be able to see it updated Sunday or Monday, so you can see what's coming up in the following week. You can also find the announcement room where I post links to new video, new stream, whatever it is, comes up there first. You can also go to the role assignments room where you can grab the reminder role if you'd like a little notification whenever I post these things. And you will also get a little reminder around 15 minutes before the stream starts if there's something time sensitive, like for example a stream. And if you did enjoy this stream, it helps me a lot if you leave a like on it in the YouTube system, you know, the thumbs up thing that tells the YouTube algorithm that this was a very nice stream and you would like more people to see it, find it very enjoyable. That helps my channel grow. So thank you so much in advance. Thank you so much, Melfort, for the 10 gifted memberships. Thank you so much. That's incredibly generous. And congratulations to James, Reese, Bin Wang Bafam, Sean Dog, Echo, Deceive, Jules, Jay Lelouch, and DSTN. Congratulations on the gifted memberships. I hope you enjoy the emotes. Thank you so much, Murphlog. Thank you. Yes, that's my job. Should I wait? But yeah, I think that is it. Thank you so much, Murphlog. That is incredible. But yeah, tomorrow I am putting out a video about 10 removed features in Final Fantasy XIV, which you might find interesting. And then Saturday, we are of course doing Small Kai's side quest, where we will be doing the Eden raid. So I hope you will all look forward to that. With that said, good night, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world, and I hope to see you all very soon. Bye bye!